Welcome to another exciting Werewolf shifter romance audiobook, marked by the Ruthless Alpha King, a Catherine Stewart collection. Chapter 1. Amara stepped onto the ceremonial grounds, her heart pounding in her chest. The crowd was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but Amara stood tall, feeling the cold sweat form on the back of her neck. She glanced at her father, King Arik, standing beside her. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes held a hint of something, pride, perhaps, or something. Her stomach twisted. She had been prepared for this moment all her life, but now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure if she was ready to accept her fate. Her father said nothing, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. The priestess, draped in shimmering silver robes, stepped forward, her voice calm and steady, carrying over the gathered crowd. We gathered today to witness the sacred ritual, to see the one chosen by destiny. Amara's chest tightened. She could feel the eyes of the nobles, the leaders, and the onlookers pressing against her, waiting for her to accept what was being thrust upon her. Her fate, her future, revealed in a moment she had no control over. Her father turned to her, his voice soft but firm. "This is your destiny, Amara. You cannot fight it." Her hands trembled, and she clenched them into fists at her sides, fighting to stay composed. She had been told all her life that this moment would come, but the reality of it, of her future being sealed in front of everyone, was unbearable. The priestess raised an orb in her hands, its light glowing brighter as it hummed with magic. Amara felt the pull of it, the magic in the air thickening. She could feel the power in the ground beneath her feet, in the air she breathed. Her skin prickled with the weight of the moment. The priestess stepped closer, holding the orb above Amara's wrist. "This will reveal your mate." Amara flinched as the orb's energy surged through her, and she could feel the mark begin to form on her skin. It burned like fire, crawling up her arm, twisting into the intricate shape of a wolf's paw, glowing and searing into her flesh. Her breath caught in her throat, the pain overwhelming. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out. Her chest heaved, but her body stayed rigid. She wanted to pull away, to scream, to reject him, but she couldn't. She felt it, the bond, the reality of it marking her as King Arik's mate, as though this fate had been decided long before she had any say in it. Her body shook from the pain, from the weight of what this meant. The mark spread further, searing into her skin, solidifying her future in an instant. "No," she whispered, the word barely escaping her lips as her fingers touched the mark. Her father's voice cut through her thoughts. "Behold, the bond is complete. She is now bound to King Arik." The crowd murmured, some in awe, others in curiosity, but Amara felt nothing but suffocation. Her hand rested over the mark, but all she could think was how it felt like chains, trapping her in a life she hadn't chosen. She could feel the eyes of her father on her, the expectations heavy, pressing against her chest. She was marked. There was no escaping it now, but in that moment, she could feel the fight rising within her, the defiance stirring in her chest. "I won't be his," she murmured to herself, barely louder than a breath, but the words rang in her ears. King Alik's eyes darkened as he turned to her, his voice low, but commanding. "You will accept this, Amara. There is no turning back now." Amara looked up at her father, the words sinking deep, stirring something she couldn't push away. She refused to be shackled to this fate, but here she was, marked, revealed, forced to face the reality of her future. She swallowed the lump in her throat, the bitterness rising as the weight of the mark on her skin felt like it was crushing her. The priestess stepped back, and the energy in the air slowly began to dissipate. The crowd continued to murmur, their gaze fixed on her. Amara stood motionless, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. Her heart beat loudly in her ears. The pressure of the crowd, of the ritual, of her father's expectations, was suffocating. She was trapped in this moment, bound by the magic, bound to a fate she never asked for. But as the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, her resolve hardened. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't MM. She had been marked. There was no escaping it. The sigil, a symbol of the bond between her and King Arik, glowed faintly on her wrist, searing into her very being. And with it, the entire world now knew her fate. But Amara couldn't. She wouldn't. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I won't be his," she muttered under her breath, the words barely escaping her lips, but they held a fierce resolve. King Aloma, her father, stepped closer, his face tight with frustration. "You will accept this, Amara. You know what it means to defy the bond. You cannot change what is destined." His voice was firm, carrying the authority of years of kingship, but there was a hint of something else, a desperation, perhaps, or a sense of guilt he wasn't ready to admit. Amara didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She could feel the disapproval radiating from him. She could feel the eyes of the nobles, the advisors, the onlookers, all of them watching her every move. She was supposed to submit, to accept this fate without question, but the very thought of it made her skin crawl. "Father, no." The words came out with more force than she intended, a sharp edge to them. She turned toward him, her eyes blazing with defiance. "This isn't my fate to choose. This bond isn't mine. I will not be bound to a man like him. I refuse." Her heart thudded in her chest, and for a moment, she almost wavered. But she shook it off. No, she wouldn't back down. Not now. Her father stepped closer, his voice low, more urgent now. "Do you understand the consequences of your refusal? The ceremony, it's not just a tradition, Amara. You've embarrassed yourself. You've shamed this family." King Arik's wrath. He paused, his expression faltering, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. "We cannot afford this. You cannot afford this." The mention of King Arik's name twisted in her gut. She had heard the stories, the whispers, the tales of his ruthless nature, of how he tore down kingdoms without a second thought. The very thought of being bound to someone like him sent a chill through her. But her heart was resolute. She wouldn't let her life be dictated by fear. "I will not be controlled. Not by you. Not by Arik," she declared, her voice shaking with the weight of her decision, but still unwavering. She turned away from her father and the crowd, walking toward the edge of the platform, needing space to breathe, needing space to think. Behind her, she could hear murmurs rising from the assembly. But Amara didn't care. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, frustration. But the storm of defiance still burned bright. She would not be his. As she reached the entrance to the palace, her father called after her, his voice strained. "Amara, come back here. You cannot leave. Not like this." But Amara kept walking. She couldn't bring herself to look back at him, not when the anger in her chest had yet to settle. But as she walked deeper into the palace, the weight of the rejection settled over her, making her feel smaller with every step. And most of all, the looming threat of King Arik himself, whose power was said to be unrivaled. His ruthlessness wasn't a rumor, it was a fact, she thought to herself. Her heart trembled at the thought of him, of the life she had just rejected. Could she survive this? Could she stand against him? Chapter 2. Amara stormed through the palace corridors, the echo of her footsteps the only sound in the heavy silence that followed the ceremony. Her mind was a battlefield, torn between her defiance and the relentless pressure mounting on her shoulders. She had rejected the bond, but now the consequences loomed, and they were heavier than she had ever anticipated. As she entered her chambers, the door closed behind her with a soft thud. She turned to find her parents already there, her mother, Queen Seraphine, standing near the window, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. King Aloma stood by the door, his presence more imposing than ever, his gaze fixed on her as if he could see straight through her. "Amara!" King Aloma's voice broke the stillness, firm but laced with an edge of frustration. "We need to talk." She couldn't run anymore. There was no escaping the reality of what she had just done. "I'm listening," she said through clenched teeth, her voice cold and distant, hiding the vulnerability she still felt. "You do not understand the gravity of what you've done, Amara. The bond was not just for you. It is for the entire pack. For our people. I don't care about the pack. Amara spat, the words sharp, her frustration boiling over. I care about my life, my choice. I should have a say in this. I didn't get a choice in who I'm supposed to marry, who I'm supposed to become. This is my life, not some political alliance. Queen Seraphine's voice, though softer, carried the weight of years of tradition. You don't understand. This bond isn't just about you. It's about the survival of our people. King Arik's alliance with our pack secures our future, Amara. You've seen the state of things. The strength of the pack depends on these alliances. Amara's chest tightened at her mother's words, but she refused to show weakness. She wouldn't let them see how much their words affected her. You want me to just accept that I've been bound to a man I barely know? Her voice shook with emotion, but she fought to keep it steady. A man who is ruthless, cold, and who thinks he can control everything. King Aloma's face darkened, a trace of impatience seeping into his features. Arik is powerful, Amara. He will bring strength to our kingdom. Do you not see the bigger picture? This isn't just about you or your feelings. It's about the survival of the pack. For your future. My future, she echoed bitterly, the weight of his words sinking into her bones. What about my choices? My happiness? Her mother sighed deeply, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. Amara, this is the way it has always been. The bond was chosen long before you were born, and you will carry that legacy forward. You are the future of this pack. You are a princess, a symbol of strength. You cannot ignore that. Amara was shaken, the realization that her life had never truly been her own. She was a tool, a piece in a game she hadn't been prepared for. The ceremony had revealed her fate, her destiny, and with it came the crushing realization that her freedom had been sacrificed before she was even old enough to understand. You want me to accept this, to accept him? Amara's voice cracked, and she quickly wiped away the tears that threatened to spill. What if I don't? What if I can't be what you want me to be? Her father stepped closer, his tone softer but still firm. Then you risk not only fracturing this family, but also the alliances that protect our pack. You risk us losing everything. The words hit her like a physical blow, and Amara recoiled as if struck. She had never considered the full consequences of her rebellion. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. This is the life fate has chosen for you, Amara. You are not just a princess, you are the future of this kingdom. And you cannot escape that. Amara stood there, silent for a moment, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The anger that had fueled her rejection began to wane, replaced by doubt. Was there any way she could truly resist this fate? Could she live with the consequences of rejecting it? I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. King Aloma's gaze softened, but the weight of his expectations still hung in the air, suffocating. You don't have a choice. You will do what is best for the kingdom. The pressure in Amara's chest tightened, and for the first time, she felt utterly isolated. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, or what her future held. Was this the price of her independence? Was it worth the cost? Think about it, Amara. For your people. For your family. Amara stood silently, the burden of her parents' words pressing down on her shoulders. She turned her gaze to the window, staring out at the kingdom beyond. The weight of her father's expectations and the reality of the bond she had rejected crushed her spirit, leaving her uncertain of what to do next. She had rejected the bond, rejected him, and now the consequences were coming. King Arik had heard of her refusal, and she knew he was coming for her. Her defiance had been met with cold silence from her father, but it hadn't been enough. The tension in the palace was thick with whispers, Arik's anger, the impending confrontation. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of her control. The door slammed open, and Amara's heart skipped a beat as King Arik stepped into the room. His presence filled the space immediately, a powerful, commanding aura that made the air feel heavier. He was tall, his muscles taut under the dark armor he wore, and his piercing gaze fixed directly on her. There was no softness in his eyes, only cold resolve and something darker. I've heard enough of your defiance, princess, Arik said, his voice deep, carrying the weight of his power. He didn't need to raise his voice. yet it resonated through her, making the walls around her seem to close in. Amara stood her ground, her fists clenched at her sides, trying to push back the surge of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm not your mate. I won't be." Her voice was defiant, but it trembled slightly, betraying the emotions she was struggling to control. Arik didn't flinch at her rejection, his expression hardening. He was beyond words now. His eyes glinted with something darker, something primal, and Amara's stomach twisted in response. "You don't get to decide that," Arik said simply, stepping closer. Each movement was slow, deliberate. The tension in the room thickened with every step he took. "The bond is sealed, whether you accept it or not." "No," Amara spat, her voice fierce as she took a step back, refusing to yield. "I won't be forced into this. I won't be your prisoner." But Arik moved faster than she could react, grabbing her wrist with a grip that was unyielding, his fingers like iron around her skin. She gasped as his touch burned through her, the same fiery heat from the mark earlier spreading like wildfire through her veins. She tried to pull away, but it was no use. His lips curled into a smirk as he looked down at her, an unspoken warning in his eyes. "Don't mistake resistance for strength, princess. It's just foolishness." Without another word, Arik pulled her closer, his free hand tracing the glowing symbol on her wrist, her mark, until his fingers brushed against the skin beneath it. The touch sent a jolt of energy through her, like electricity. "You're mine, whether you like it or not," he said, his voice low, almost a growl, as his grip on her wrist tightened. She wanted to push him away, wanted to scream, but all she could do was struggle against him, feeling her body heat with every second. He looked down at her with cold determination before his gaze shifted to her neck. Her pulse throbbed beneath the surface, and she knew what was coming. "No, not like this. Don't you dare," Amara whispered, but the words were lost as Arik moved in. With one swift motion, he tilted her head to the side, exposing her throat to him. His lips brushed her skin lightly before he sank his teeth into her neck. The pain was sharp, searing, a fiery sting that traveled through her body. Her vision blurred, and she gasped in agony, her fingers clutching at his arm, trying to pull him off. But Arik held her still, his grip like a vice as he completed the mark, one that was his to give. The pain subsided, replaced with a strange, overwhelming pull deep in her chest, a connection to him that she couldn't escape. The mark on her skin flared to life once again, now unmistakably his, as though it had always been there, waiting to claim her. Amara staggered back, her heart hammering, tears blurring her vision. She touched her neck, feeling the heat of the mark now branded into her skin, and the familiar fear rushed through her. "You're mine," Arik said again, his voice softer now, but still carrying the weight of his authority. "And nothing you do can change that." Amara stood there, stunned, the reality of what had just happened crashing over her. Her entire body felt as if it had been violated, her heart twisted in knots. She wanted to scream, to fight him, but the bond burned like fire inside her, and she knew there was no way out. Her pulse still raced, and her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and anger. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She wasn't supposed to be claimed like this, taken without any say in it. But as Arik turned to leave, his gaze lingering on her one last time, Amara's resolve began to shift. She couldn't deny the pull of the bond, the connection he had forced upon her, but that didn't mean she would bow to him. She would fight him. She would frustrate him. She would never love him. She had been marked. Her future was no longer her own. But this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Amara stood in the center of her chamber, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The mark on her neck, the glowing symbol of King Arik's claim over her, pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of the irreversible decision she had just made. Her fingers brushed lightly over the burn of the mark, still tender from the force of the bite, and she recoiled slightly at the feeling. The warmth of it was an alien sensation, and it made her sick to her stomach. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something, to rip the mark from her skin, to erase the reality of it. But all she could do was stand there, numb and staring, her mind spinning with confusion and anger. The door creaked open behind her, and Amara didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Her closest friend, Lena, stepped into the room quietly, her expression sympathetic, but also hesitant. "You're back already," Amara said bitterly, her voice sharper than she intended. She quickly turned from the mirror, refusing to look at her friend for a moment longer. Lena stayed by the door, her hands clasped together in front of her. She knew better than to speak first. Amara had always been the one to speak her mind. But today was different. Today, Tessa knew that no words could offer comfort. "Amara," Lena began, her voice soft but steady. "I heard what happened." Don't," Amara snapped, cutting her off. "I don't need your sympathy. I don't need anyone's sympathy. This isn't something I wanted, Lena." Her eyes flashed with bitterness. "I didn't ask for this life." Lena's face softened with empathy, and she crossed the room slowly to stand beside Amara. She placed a tentative hand on her shoulder, the weight of the gesture both comforting and painful for Amara to endure. "I know," Lena said gently. "I know this isn't what you wanted. But you know how it is. I've heard the stories, Amara. People who fought the marking. It never ended well." Amara's chest tightened, her frustration and anger threatening to boil over. "Then what am I supposed to do, Lena? Just accept it. Let him have everything. Let him own me." Lena hesitated. I can't say what's best for you. I know you've always been strong, but this is different." She paused, her eyes searching Amara's face. "The bond is unbreakable. You've seen what happens to those who fight it. Their lives, they fall apart. It doesn't just hurt them, it hurts everyone around them." Amara turned away, her heart aching at the thought of everything she stood to lose. "I can't let this happen. I can't be his. I can't be shackled by this mark." She clenched her fists, her body trembling with the weight of the decision. "I can't even look at myself without seeing it. And now, he thinks he has the right to control me, to claim me." Lena stayed silent, unsure of how to ease the turmoil in her friend's heart. She wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but she knew better. The situation was far from simple. There were no easy answers. "I have to do something," Amara said with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. She turned to face Lena, her expression more resolved, though her eyes were filled with fear. "I need to confront my parents. They need to hear this from me, not just from some rumor. They need to understand what I've been forced into." Lena's face shifted with worry. "Amara, you know how they'll react. You know what your father will do." "I don't care anymore," Amara muttered, though the words lacked their usual conviction. "I can't stay silent, pretending everything is fine. I can't let this go. I need to speak to them, to make them understand that I'm not just some pawn in their game." She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were trembling. "But I also know the cost. If I keep fighting this, if I keep rejecting it, it could ruin everything. It could destroy me. It could destroy them." Lena nodded, understanding the heavy weight of Amara's dilemma. "I don't know what will happen, but you're not alone in this. I'll be here for you, no matter what you decide." Amara's lips twisted into a bitter smile, though the tension in her eyes remained. "I don't know if there's anything anyone can do to help me now, Lena. The bond is made. The mark is there. But if I let it happen, if I let Arik take me as his, I'll lose everything. My autonomy, my life, my future." She turned away, pacing the room again, her mind torn between defiance and the crushing reality of what was happening. She couldn't undo it, and deep down, she feared the consequences of trying. "I have to go to them," Amara said softly after a long silence. "I have to tell them. They've forced this on me, but maybe I can make them see. If they won't listen, then I'll walk away and let the consequences fall on their heads." Lena's eyes filled with worry as she watched her friend, knowing the battle that lay ahead. "Just be careful, Amara. The path you're about to take could break you." Amara stopped and looked at her for a moment. Her eyes were full of doubt, but there was a flicker of resolve deep within them. "It's too late to stop now. I've already defied fate once. I have to keep fighting, or everything will slip away. But I won't give up. Not now. Not ever. With that, Amara turned toward the door. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, but a sense of purpose began to build inside her as she prepared to face the most difficult conversation of her life. The doors to the royal chambers crashed open with a force that made the guards flinch, and Amara stormed into the room. Her chest heaved with fury, her every step fueled by the whirlwind of emotions that had torn through her since the moment she'd been marked. She didn't care who saw her, who heard her. She was past caring. Her mother, Queen Seraphine, stood by the window, her hands folded calmly in front of her as she observed Amara's entrance. But King Aloma, her father, looked up sharply from his desk, eyes narrowing in both surprise and concern. Amara's voice rang out, sharp and accusatory. How could you let him do this? How could you stand by and let Arik mark me like that? Her father's face tightened, and Amara could see the guilt swimming in his gaze. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. You knew it was coming, Amara, King Aloma said slowly, as if testing the waters before speaking. This has always been the way. Always been the way. Amara snapped, taking a step forward, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and frustration. So you're telling me I had no say in it? That I'm just a pawn in your political games, just like this marriage was always meant to be? The king stood up now, the weight of his authority settling over the room. It's not like that. You've been chosen, Amara. You and Arik were always fated to be together. This bond is powerful, and nothing can break it. We all knew this day would come. Her mother spoke next, her tone gentle but firm, her eyes full of a sorrow that Amara didn't want to face. Your father and I have always done what was best for this kingdom, for you, Amara. This alliance, this bond, is what ensures our survival. Amara felt the tears well up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, her heart hardening with every word that came out of their mouths. I don't care about survival, she shouted. What about me? What about my life? My choices? Don't I get a say in this? King Aloma took a step toward her, his voice softer now, though the tension was still thick. Amara, I would have stopped Arik if I could. But this bond, it's not something we can control. It's a force greater than all of us. Do you think I wanted to see you marked like that? The pain in his eyes was clear, but it didn't change anything. Amara crossed her arms over her chest, biting back the lump in her throat. You should have stopped him. You should have done something. You should have protected me from this. Her mother's eyes softened, but there was no real comfort in her gaze. Amara, I understand you're upset, but you have to understand something. This bond isn't just between you and Arik. It affects the future of our people, our pack. The power he holds is something we can't ignore. I don't care about that. Amara's voice broke, the words escaping her before she could stop them. I don't care about the pack, or politics, or alliances. All I care about is that I'm stuck in this, and there's nothing I can do about it. Her father's face twisted with frustration. You don't understand. No. Amara cut him off, shaking her head fiercely. You don't understand. You made me a part of this. You forced me into it. And now I'm tied to someone I don't even know. A king who doesn't care about me, who only sees me as his property. Her father stepped back, pain flickering in his eyes. He was silent for a long moment, then finally spoke, his voice low and reluctant. You think I don't care? You think I wanted this for you? But Amara, this is beyond me. This bond is fate. You can fight it, but there will be consequences. You saw what happened when others tried to resist it. Amara's chest tightened as the weight of his words settled over her. She knew the stories, the rumors of people who had fought the bond, only to fall apart, their lives destroyed. And though she hadn't wanted to hear it, a part of her feared the consequences of pushing further against Arik. But I don't want this life, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want to be forced into him. She turned to her mother, the only one left who might understand. Why didn't you protect me? Why didn't either of you stop him? Her mother lowered her gaze, her expression filled with a deep sorrow. We did what we thought was best. The bond is not something to be tampered with. It's a sacred connection, not just for our kingdom but for you too. It will be a part of your life, whether you accept it or not. Amara looked at her father again, searching for some sign of empathy, some indication that he might do something to help her. But all she saw was the resignation in his eyes, the helplessness that mirrored her own. I can't undo it, Amara. It's done, King Aloma said, his voice filled with an emotion he hadn't yet expressed. All we can do now is accept it and find a way to live with it. Amara turned away from them both, her frustration and anger boiling to the surface. So that's it? I just have to accept it? I have no choice. Her father opened his mouth to speak but stopped, his face heavy with the burden of his own choices. I'm sorry, Amara, he said quietly. There's nothing more I can do. Amara stood still for a moment, her hands balled into fists at her sides. The realization hit her like a physical blow. There was no fighting this. The bond had been sealed, and there was no going back. The emotional weight of the situation threatened to crush her, but she held on to the last shred of her defiance. You've abandoned me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the words carried all the weight of her pain, her anger, and her disillusionment. With that, she turned and stormed out of the room, leaving her parents standing in silence behind her. Her steps echoed in the empty corridor as she made her way out of the palace, the mark still burning on her skin, a constant reminder of the future she had never wanted. Chapter 4. Amara slammed the letter down onto her desk, her fingers trembling with fury. The official seal of the palace glared up at her like a constant reminder of the world she was being forced into. Her gaze locked onto the words, "You are requested to present yourself at the palace within a fortnight. Failure to comply will result in consequences." Consequences. The word hung in the air like a poison, threatening to suffocate her. She stood up suddenly, knocking the chair behind her, and began to pace the room, her anger rising like a tide. Her breath was ragged, her mind a whirlwind of rage, confusion, and defiance. The thought of submitting to King Arik's control made her sick to her stomach. How could they expect her to just go? After everything, after the mark, after him. Amara! Lena's voice came softly from the door, hesitant but concerned. What's going on? I heard. I'm not going. Amara turned to face her friend, her voice trembling with emotion. I won't. I'm not going to the palace, Lena. Not after what happened. Not after everything. Lena stepped into the room, her brow furrowing in confusion. But, Amara, this is a formal request from the palace. It's not something you can just ignore. You have to go. If you don't, there will be consequences. Consequences. Amara scoffed bitterly, her voice rising with frustration. You don't get it, do you? Every part of this is a consequence. This whole thing is a trap. I'm being forced into a life that I didn't choose. A life where I'm not me anymore, I'm just his. Lena hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I know you're angry, and I know how much this all hurts. But Amara, think about the risk. You can't just refuse without considering what will happen next. Arik, he's not just some man you can ignore. Amara shook her head, her hands trembling as she gripped the desk for support. I'm not going. I can't go back to that. I won't. I refuse to live under his thumb, to live in a world where my body, my mind, my future is controlled by him. I refuse to go to the palace, and that's final. Lena walked up to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and sympathy. I understand your anger, I do. But you know the stakes. You know what Arik is capable of. If you refuse, if you turn your back on him, it might break everything. Your family, the kingdom. You're not just defying him, you're defying everyone. I don't care. Amara snapped, pushing past Lena and pacing the room again, her fists clenched tight by her sides. I'm done with this. I'm done with being someone's pawn. I've spent my whole life being told what to do, who to marry, who to be, and I can't do it anymore. Lena stood quietly, her face soft with understanding, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. Amara, I can't tell you what to do, but I'm afraid for you. If you keep pushing him, You know the consequences will be more than just you getting hurt. Your actions could affect everyone around you. Amara stopped pacing and met her friend's gaze. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, she stood still, her heart beating hard against her chest. The decision to defy Arik was one of the hardest she'd ever faced. She was scared of what would happen next, scared of the cost of rejecting the bond. But the feeling of helplessness, of being shackled to someone else's will, was far worse. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. I know the consequences, and I'm willing to face them. I have to. I have to take control of my own life. I won't let him control me any longer. Lena took a step back, watching Amara closely. So what now? What do you plan to do? Amara took a deep breath, her gaze hardening. I'm not going to the palace. I'll find another way. I'll find another path. But I won't let him think he owns me. I won't give him the satisfaction of breaking me. Her heart pounded with both fear and determination. She was standing at the edge of something huge, something irreversible. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a spark that maybe, just maybe, she could fight back against the bond, against the life that had been forced on her. I'll do it on my terms, she said firmly, looking Lena in the eye. And if it means I lose everything, so be it. But I'm not going back. Not to him. Lena stayed silent for a long moment, her expression filled with a mix of fear and admiration. Amara, you're stronger than I think you realize. But whatever happens, I'm with you. I just hope you're ready for what's coming. Amara nodded, her jaw set, the weight of her decision hanging in the air. I'm ready, and no matter what happens, I'll face it. This is my fight. The room felt heavier now, the decision settled, but the stakes were higher than ever. Amara knew there would be consequences, she couldn't run from them. But the fire inside her had ignited, and she wasn't going to back down. Amara's breath catches in her throat as she realizes that her life is no longer her own. She hears downstairs there is a message from King Arik. What does Arik want now? Chapter 5. Amara stood by her bed, her arms crossed over her chest, staring at the pile of clothes and belongings on the floor. She hadn't packed a single thing. It wasn't that she didn't know how. It was that she didn't want to. She had no intention of going to the palace. She wasn't going to let Arik win. Her mother, Queen Seraphine, appeared in the doorway, her expression tense. Amara, we don't have much time. Pack your things now. We can't keep King Arik waiting any longer. Amara glanced up, her eyes filled with a mixture of bitterness and defiance. I'm not ready, she said, deliberately slow in her movements. I need to make sure I don't forget anything. Her mother's patience was wearing thin. This is not a time for your stubbornness. You know what's at stake. She took a step closer, trying to hurry her daughter along. The sooner we leave, the better. You know what Arik is capable of if we make him wait. Amara swallowed the anger that threatened to spill over. She wasn't ready to be forced into this life. Not yet. Not when she still had a sliver of hope to resist. But as she slowly began to fold her things, her mind raced, and every piece she packed felt like a small betrayal. Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. Amara, I'll help you if you need it, but this delay is only going to make things worse. I'm fine, Amara muttered, unwilling to look at her mother as she reluctantly packed the last few items, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. Once her bags were packed, Amara stood at the window, looking out at the grounds of the palace. The carriage was waiting, its horses already harnessed and ready for the journey to Arik's kingdom. Her mother stood by the door, urging her forward. It's time, her mother said, her voice tinged with impatience. We need to go, Amara. Amara hesitated. She had wanted to fight, to delay as long as possible. She felt the urge to turn and bolt, to run, to scream out in defiance. But she knew that was futile. So, she walked toward the door slowly, dragging her feet, deliberately looking around as though something might catch her eye and delay her further. I think I forgot something, she said, her voice sharp. I need to check the other room. Her mother sighed deeply, exasperated. Amara, we've been over everything. We're leaving now. I'll just be a minute, Amara insisted, turning toward the hallway, her heart pounding as she tried to find some small excuse to delay even more. The more time she could waste, the more she could cling to her last shred of independence. Her mother followed closely, her voice growing more urgent. We can't keep him waiting. You know what happens if you do. Amara felt the weight of her mother's words, and for a moment she faltered. She didn't want to risk her family's safety, but the idea of being with Arik, of being claimed by him, made her sick. She wasn't ready to face that reality. Not yet. Reluctantly, she boarded the carriage, her chest heavy with anger and helplessness. She sat across from her mother, her gaze fixed outside, watching the scenery pass as the carriage slowly started its journey. As the carriage rolled through the countryside, Amara's frustration mounted. She tried to calm herself, but the anger boiled beneath her skin, making every passing tree, every rustling leaf seem like an obstruction to her freedom. After what felt like an eternity of delays, the carriage finally approached the palace gates. Amara could see the imposing structure ahead, the high walls and the grandeur that felt like a prison. Her heart clenched in her chest. The guards at the gate eyed the carriage, then turned their gaze to Amara, waiting for her to step inside. "We're here, princess," one of them called, his voice stiff with formality. "It's time to enter." Amara remained seated, her eyes fixed on the palace ahead. "I'm not going in," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. She crossed her arms, refusing to budge. "Not until King Arik himself welcomes me." The guard shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his superior. "The king is waiting, princess. You must enter." Amara shook her head, her jaw set with defiance. "I'm not going in until he comes to greet me." The guard looked at her, unsure what to do. He nodded quickly, signaling to the other guard. They exchanged glances, and then, to her surprise, the gates creaked open slightly. Moments later, King Arik appeared, walking toward her with a calm, commanding presence. His eyes met hers, unyielding, unwavering. "Welcome, my mate," he said, his voice deep, the words heavy with authority. "You have made your point. Now come." Amara's chest tightened as she stood, her body screaming to resist, but her legs were already moving. She had no choice. As she walked toward him, the full weight of the situation crashed down on her. She was being forced into this life, this bond, but she would never surrender completely. At one point, she asked the driver to stop. "I just want to admire that rock," she said, her voice filled with sarcasm. The driver, clearly uncertain, complied and pulled the carriage to a halt. Amara stepped out, staring at the small rock by the roadside, pretending it was a reason to delay. She breathed deeply, her frustration growing. Why was she being forced into this? She glanced over at Tessa, who had been silent for the entire ride, watching her closely but saying nothing. Amara didn't want to talk about it, not yet. Not when the reality of what she had done, what she was doing, was sinking in. Every step closer to the palace felt like a step further from her own identity, from her own desires. She walked slowly around the carriage, as though admiring the fields, the trees, the sky. Anything to avoid the inevitable. Amara stepped into the palace, her eyes darting around the grand hall. The palace was unlike anything she had ever seen. High ceilings stretched far above her, adorned with intricate tapestries and golden chandeliers that shimmered in the soft glow of the evening light. Rich carpets covered the floors, and marble columns stood like silent sentinels around her. The air smelled faintly of roses and incense, and the warmth of the palace only made her feel more like an intruder. She paused, caught by the beauty of it all. Her breath caught in her throat for a brief moment as she took in the grandeur, the endless luxury. But it didn't matter. This palace, with its walls and its beauty, was nothing more than a gilded cage. "You like it?" Arik's voice interrupted her thoughts, cutting through the silence. His tone was sharp, but there was something darkly amused about it, as though he enjoyed watching her wrestle with her own emotions. Amara turned to face him, her eyes narrowing in defiance. "It's certainly big enough," she said with a sneer, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "A palace for a king, and a prison for me. Very fitting." Arik's eyes darkened, and the air between them shifted, heavy with unspoken tension. He took a step closer, his expression hardening. "I'm not in the mood for your games, Amara." Amara stood her ground, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She wasn't afraid of him. She had rejected him already, and there was no turning back. "You want me to like it, but I won't," she said, her voice cool and unyielding. "I don't belong here, and you can't make me." Arik's jaw clenched, his temper rising. "You're here now," he said coldly, "whether you like it or not." He turned sharply and began walking toward the hallway, expecting her to follow. "Come, you'll follow me to your quarters." Amara hesitated for a moment, her pride keeping her rooted to the spot. "I'll go when I'm ready," she said defiantly, crossing her arms over her chest. "You can't order me around." Arik didn't pause. His back was straight, his stride purposeful, as though his authority was unquestionable. "You'll go now, Amara," he said over his shoulder, his voice low and commanding. "I don't have time for games." Amara felt a surge of anger, her chest tight with the desire to push back against him. "I'm not some puppet to be ordered around." "Perhaps you should start acting like you're not one," Arik said, turning sharply. His eyes burned with anger, his patience thinning. "I said come." Her defiance flared as she clenched her fists. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Arik's gaze hardened, and for a moment the air felt thick, almost suffocating with his presence. His voice was measured, but the fury simmering beneath it was unmistakable. "You will follow me now," he said, his voice cold as ice, "or I'll make you." Amara's heart pounded. She refused to let him control her, to give in to his demands. She wasn't some helpless pawn to be dragged around. She wasn't going to let him think he could bend her, well, so easily. But Arik didn't wait for her response. He turned to the guard standing nearby, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lock her in her quarters," he ordered sharply. "She'll learn quickly what happens when she refuses to obey." Amara's breath caught in her throat. The reality of her situation hit her harder than she had expected. She had resisted before, but now the consequences were here. The guards moved quickly, two of them stepping forward to seize her arms before she could react. She jerked away, but their grip was too strong. "No," she shouted, her body straining against them. "You can't do this." Arik's gaze remained cold, unfeeling. "You brought this upon yourself," he said, his voice detached. "Maybe now you'll learn to respect authority." As the guards ushered her down the hallway, Amara fought back with every ounce of strength she had left, but the palace was too well guarded, and Arik's power too overwhelming. She felt her body give way to their grip as they pushed her into a small, lavish room and slammed the door behind her. She pounded against the door with her fists, the fury and helplessness building inside her like a storm. She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But nothing would change. The door remained locked, and her rebellion only seemed to make her more isolated. The minutes stretched on, and Amara sank to the floor, her anger slowly giving way to a deep, gnawing sense of powerlessness. She had defied Arik, had pushed against the bond, but all she had succeeded in doing was further alienating herself from the world around her. Her breath slowed, and she wiped away the tears that threatened to spill. No matter how much she hated it, no matter how fiercely she resisted, she had lost. She was trapped in a world she couldn't control, with no way out, and the weight of that truth settled on her shoulders like a crushing weight. Chapter 6. Amara sat on the plush velvet chaise in her quarters, her legs crossed and her arms folded tightly across her chest. The soft flickering light from the candles on the table barely illuminated the lavish room, and she barely noticed the opulence that surrounded her anymore. The weight of her situation pressed down on her like a suffocating blanket. She had locked herself away from the rest of the palace, determined to avoid Arik at all costs. She heard a soft knock on her door. Her heart skipped a beat, and she clenched her fists, resisting the urge to storm to the door. She knew who it was. "Amara, Arik's voice called from the other side, low and commanding. "Open the door." She ignored him, staring at the wall in front of her. She wasn't going to let him in. She wasn't going to give in to whatever game he was playing. He could shout, he could threaten, but she wouldn't open the door. The knocking continued, harder now, more insistent. "Amara," he repeated, his voice tinged with impatience. "I'm not going to ask again." Her pulse quickened, and she bit her lip to keep herself from speaking. No, she thought. She wouldn't. Not now. Not when she had the chance to remain in control, even if it was just for a moment. "Amara!" Arik's voice thundered this time, and she could feel the heat of his anger seeping through the door. "Open the damn door." Amara pushed herself up from the chaise and walked to the door, stopping just before it. Her hand hovered over the handle for a moment, but then she turned away, her heart pounding with both defiance and fear. "No," she said firmly, her voice calm, though her chest was tight with tension. "I'm not opening it." The sound of Arik's footsteps grew louder, closer to the door, and she braced herself for whatever might come next. "You will open this door, Amara," he said, his tone now cold and commanding. "You cannot keep me waiting forever." But Amara held her ground, crossing her arms again, her jaw clenched. "I said no." A heavy silence settled over the room for a few seconds, and then came his words, laced with fury. "You are testing my patience, princess." The anger in his voice sent a shiver down her spine, but Amara refused to let her fear control her. She would not give him the satisfaction. After a long, tense moment, Amara thought she heard Arik turn and walk away. But instead, there was a soft murmur of voices just outside the door. She couldn't quite make out the words, but the tone was different, calm, almost soothing. The voice of one of Arik's advisors, his right-hand man, filtered through the door, speaking in a low, measured tone. "Your Highness, perhaps a gentler approach would serve you better. She needs time. You can't force her, but a more subtle invitation might bring her around." Amara felt her heart rate slow, the anger dissipating slightly, but the frustration still burned. She wasn't sure what the advisor meant, but it felt like something was shifting. She still wouldn't open the door. Not for Arik, not for anyone, but her resolve had faltered. "Amara," Arik's voice was softer this time, no longer demanding but still laced with authority. "I'm not asking. I'm inviting you to join me for dinner. You can come, or you can remain here. But know this, I will not let you hide forever." Her heart wavered, her pride and anger warring with the exhaustion that filled her mind. He was trying to coax her, manipulate her with calm words. But the truth was, she had no choice. Amara finally moved toward the door again, her hand still hesitating before she opened it. It felt like surrender. The moment the door creaked open, she saw Arik standing there, his posture relaxed, but his eyes cold. "I'll come to dinner," she said, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. She barely recognized the words as they left her mouth, but there was no turning back now. Arik nodded, a small but approving smile tugging at his lips. "Good. I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable." Amara followed Arik as he walked down the grand corridor of the palace, the sheer size of the building making her feel even more insignificant. Every step she took felt heavy, as if the walls were closing in on her. She tried to keep her pace even, her chin lifted in defiance, but the pressure of the palace, of the moment, was crushing. At one point, she stopped walking, glancing down a side hallway as if considering running. She had no plan, no destination. But she knew one thing. She wanted out of his reach. Arik turned, his gaze fixed on her. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Are you going to waste my time, Amara, or will you come with me like I asked?" She clenched her fists at her sides, her pride still burning, but deep down, she knew she couldn't escape this. Not now. "You can't make me," she spat, her voice shaky despite the bravado. Arik didn't respond with words. He turned to the nearest guard, who immediately stepped forward. "Take her to the dining hall," he ordered. Before Amara could protest, 2 guards seized her arms. She fought them, but their grip was unyielding, their strength overwhelming. She yanked and struggled, but they lifted her off her feet, dragging her toward the dining hall. "You can't do this!" Amara shouted, the humiliation burning as she was physically carried away. "Let me go!" Arik walked ahead of them, his gaze impassive. "You're wasting your energy, Amara. This is how things are now. You'll learn quickly enough." Amara was placed roughly on a chair in front of the grand dining table, the room silent except for the quiet hum of anticipation. She was furious, her chest heaving, her face flushed with anger. But as Arik sat across from her, his expression calm and calculating, the realization settled in that she was completely powerless in this situation. The food on the table seemed like an offering, but it felt like a mockery. She sat there in silence, her gaze fixed on her plate, unwilling to look at Arik. He met her gaze and smiled faintly. "You've made your point, Amara. But let me remind you, you'll find it hard to resist me. In time, you'll understand the value of the bond." She glared at him, the anger still bubbling inside, but her mind was exhausted. She didn't want to speak. She didn't want to do anything but get away. But as she sat there, the quiet weight of the evening settling over her, she realized just how much control Arik had over everything. And it was a control she could never escape. Amara sat stiffly at the edge of the bed in her quarters, the soft rustle of the silk sheets barely audible beneath her steady, heavy breaths. Her body still ached from the humiliation of being carried across the palace, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She had never felt so violated, so powerless. She clenched her fists in her lap, her nails digging into the skin of her palms, as if the physical pain might somehow subdue the rage inside her. The door creaked open, and Arik stepped inside, his presence as imposing as ever. His gaze locked onto her immediately, as if he could read every thought, every ounce of resistance written on her face. Amara didn't look at him. She refused to meet his gaze. Instead, she stared out the window, her back rigid as she braced herself for the next command, the next violation of her will. "Amara," Arik's voice was calm, smooth, almost mocking. "I'm curious. Why do you persist in making this difficult?" Her jaw clenched tighter, and she bit her tongue to keep herself from snapping. This wasn't a conversation she wanted to have. She had no intention of playing his games. Arik, as if sensing her resistance, stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You know, it's not too late for you to change your mind. If you would just speak to me, we could." "I don't want to talk to you," Amara snapped, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I don't want anything from you." His expression hardened, and for a moment, his eyes flickered with something darker, but he quickly masked it with a controlled smile. "You will talk to me, Amara, whether you want to or not." Amara stood abruptly, unable to contain the anger that surged through her veins. She turned to face him, her voice low but filled with venom. "You don't get to control me. You don't get to force me into this life. You can't make me like you or respect you, Arik." He didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stepped closer, and his voice was cool, as though he was speaking to a child. "I don't need your respect. I need your cooperation. If you don't speak to me willingly, you'll be forced to listen. And eventually, you'll understand that this is how it must be." Amara clenched her jaw, the words searing her throat, but she bit them back. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing just how much he affected her. Arik paused for a moment, studying her with a keen, calculating gaze. "Tell me about yourself, Amara. I don't know much about you, who you really are behind all this resistance. You've been raised as a princess, but I wonder if you even understand what that means. You've always had everything handed to you, yet you still refuse what's best for you." Amara felt a surge of frustration rise within her chest. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. How could she explain herself to someone like him? Someone who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end? "I'm not telling you anything," she said through clenched teeth, her voice cold with defiance. "You don't deserve to know anything about me." Arik's lips curled into a small smile, amusement dancing in his eyes. "I see. It seems you're determined to remain silent. That's fine. But know this, Amara. Silence won't protect you here. Just as she was about to turn away, the sound of the door creaking open once more interrupted their tension. Her personal maid, Tessa, stepped into the room, a hesitant but knowing look on her face. She had been with Amara for years, and though she wasn't in a position to change things, she knew how to speak to Amara when the walls were high. "Your Highness," Tessa said softly, "you can't stay locked away like this. If you won't speak to him directly, at least give him a chance to understand you. Just tell him what you really want." Amara hesitated, her heart aching as she realized how trapped she felt. She couldn't keep going like this, hiding from the truth. With a sigh, she looked back at Arik, her defiance waning. "I want my freedom," she said, her voice small but resolute. "I want to make my own choices. I don't want to be a puppet in your game. I don't want to be his, not like this." Arik's expression softened, though there was still a coldness to his gaze. He took a step toward her, the air between them tense. "I hear you, Amara. I understand that you want freedom, but you need to understand something. You don't have the luxury of choices right now." Amara flinched, the weight of his words sinking in, but she refused to let herself be cowed by him. "You don't get to treat me like I'm one of your subjects. You can't just pick me up and carry me wherever you want." Arik's gaze flickered with something like understanding before his voice softened, though there was still a touch of amusement in it. "No more carrying then," he said, his tone lighter than before. "If you listen, there won't be any need for that." Amara shot him a glare, the defiance returning in full force. "I don't care what you promise, Arik. I will never be your prisoner." He chuckled lightly, the sound cold, almost mocking. "We'll see about that, Amara. I'll give you your space, but remember, your actions have consequences." Her chest tightened, but Amara could feel a sense of power shift. She had made her point. She was still standing her ground, even if the battle felt endless. As Arik turned to leave, his guards following behind him, Amara allowed herself a moment to exhale. Despite the walls closing in on her, despite the chains she still couldn't break, she felt something shift within herself. Maybe she couldn't escape him yet, but she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. Amara hesitates, feeling both a deep sense of fear and an odd thrill, not knowing what Arik's intentions are this time. Her decision in this moment could change everything. What is he planning now? Chapter 7. Amara paced back and forth in her quarters, the air thick with tension. Her body burned with the heat, an undeniable and overwhelming sensation that made her feel both restless and trapped in her own skin. Her mind screamed for release, for freedom, but she knew better than to give in to the desires that threatened to overwhelm her. She wasn't ready for Arik to see her like this, not when everything between them was already so fraught with tension. The door creaked open, and Tessa, her maid, stepped inside with a tray of herbs and tea. She immediately noticed the strain in Amara's face and approached with concern. "Your Highness, you're burning up," Tessa said gently, setting the tray down on the table. "You need to rest." Amara stood still for a moment, her gaze flickering to the door, but she knew she had to address something first. She couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. "Tell me," she began, trying to steady her voice. "What do you think of Arik?" Tessa hesitated before replying, her tone careful but honest. "He is a good man, Your Highness. Ruthless, yes, but only because he's been raised to be that way. His kingdom, his people, they depend on his strength and his commands. He has no choice but to be who he is." Amara snorted, turning away from her maid to gaze out the window. "A good man," she muttered bitterly. "I can't bring myself to believe that. I won't. Not after everything he's done, not after what he's made me endure." Tessa sighed softly, not wanting to press too much, but understanding Amara's turmoil. "I know, Your Highness. I know. But sometimes, what we see as ruthless, he sees as necessary." Amara clenched her fists, the heat intensifying within her. She wasn't about to soften her stance, not when her world felt so far out of her control. "I can't be vulnerable now," she said, more to herself than to Tessa. "Not to him." Tessa nodded, understanding Amara's resolve, but she couldn't deny the sadness in her heart for her princess. "I'll prepare something for your condition, Your Highness. You need to rest." Amara swallowed her frustration, dismissing the conversation with a brief wave of her hand. Yes. Thank you, Tessa." Moments later, there was a knock on the door, and Tessa stepped forward to open it. A guard stood in the doorway, his expression neutral. "Your Highness," the guard said, "King Arik requests your presence." Amara's stomach turned. She hadn't been expecting this. Not now, not when she was burning up with heat. She could feel the pull of it in every inch of her skin, the desire for release, the desperation that clawed at her. "I'm not going," Amara said quickly, panic rising in her chest. She couldn't go to him like this, not when she was at her most vulnerable. "Tell him I'm sick. Tell him I need rest." Tessa hesitated but nodded, stepping forward to speak to the guard. "Her Highness is indisposed. She needs rest. She cannot meet with His Majesty today." The guard looked uncertain, but nodded curtly. "I will inform him." As the guard left, Amara collapsed onto the bed, her breath coming in short, desperate bursts. Her body felt hot, out of control, and the thought of Arik sensing her in this state made her stomach churn. No sooner had Amara closed her eyes than she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching her door again. Her heart raced as she knew exactly who it was. The knock came, sharp and demanding. "Amara," Arik's voice called through the door, smooth yet firm. "I'm coming in." She tensed, panic rising in her chest. "No," she muttered under her breath. "Please, no." But the door creaked open, and Arik's shadow fell across the room. He stood there for a moment, surveying her, his gaze intense and searching. "I know you're awake," Arik said calmly. "And I know what you're trying to do." Amara's breath caught, and her heart pounded painfully in her chest. "He knows," she thought with a rush of panic. He could sense it. He could sense her. She felt her body heating in a way that made it impossible to hide. But she wouldn't give in. "Not yet." "Tessa," Amara called weakly, her voice trembling with urgency. "Tell him I'm sleeping. Tell him I'm too ill to meet with him." Tessa stepped forward quickly, her eyes wide with concern. "Your Highness is not well. She needs rest. She is sleeping now and should not be disturbed." Arik's gaze flickered to Tessa for a brief moment, the edge of his anger apparent in the tightness of his jaw. He was angry, but Amara could see a subtle change in his eyes, something like amusement mixed with frustration. "If you insist," Arik said, his voice low and dangerous. "But this is not over, Amara." The tension between them was palpable, but Amara held her ground, refusing to meet his gaze. She could feel the heat inside her chest, the weight of his presence growing. But for now, at least, she had won. He sighed, his footsteps echoing in the hall as he turned to leave. "We'll speak later, Amara," he said, the words lingering in the air. Amara exhaled a long, shaky breath as the door closed behind him. She was alone, and though her heart still raced from the encounter, she knew she had managed to avoid him for now. Her body still burned with the heat, and the sense of desperation lingered, but at least, in this moment, she had regained some control. The emotional and physical weight of what had just passed settled over her, leaving her feeling drained. But there was a small spark of victory, a moment where she'd managed to protect herself from the storm that was Arik. 2 days had passed since Amara had successfully avoided Arik's persistent attempts to engage with her. The tension between them hung thick in the air, with every passing hour bringing more pressure. Arik had been constantly checking on her, sending his guards to monitor her well-being, while her maid, Tessa, had become his secret informant, reporting every detail to him in hushed tones. Amara paced her quarters once again, her thoughts a chaotic mess of frustration and growing helplessness. She couldn't escape him, couldn't escape this palace, this life. Arik's eyes were always on her, always waiting for her to bend, to fall in line. Today, Tessa entered, her eyes wary but firm. "Your Highness, I've just received word that there will be a smaller gala hosted by the pack. It's to introduce you as the king's mate." Amara stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking. "Introduce me," she repeated, her voice a mix of disbelief and disgust. "As his mate?" "Yes," Tessa said softly, her gaze sympathetic. "It's expected. You'll need to attend. You can't avoid it, not now." Amara closed her eyes, her fists clenching. The idea of being paraded around like some object, a mere possession for Arik to show off, made her blood boil. "I won't go," she said sharply, her voice full of finality. "I won't be used as some trophy." Tessa stepped closer, her expression filled with quiet concern. "Amara, I know you're angry, but refusing will only make things worse. The pack expects you to be there. It's part of your position now." Amara stared at her, a deep sense of resistance surging within her. "I don't care about their expectations. I care about my own freedom. But you know as well as I do that the king's authority is not something you can simply ignore," Tessa said gently. "He won't take kindly to you defying him again. It's better to go and keep things calm. And if you want to fight back, you can do it in your own way. But don't let it be a fight you lose before it even starts." Amara let out a frustrated sigh, pacing again. Her heart thudded against her chest. She hated the thought of being presented to everyone like this. But she couldn't ignore the reality. She was trapped in this life now, and the consequences of refusing would be too severe. After a long silence, she nodded, her voice quiet but resolute. "Fine, I'll go. But this is the last thing I do for him." Tessa smiled faintly, relieved that Amara had finally agreed. "I'll help you prepare." The gala was extravagant as expected, the ballroom alive with the hum of voices and music. Amara stood off to the side, her nerves raw, her heart heavy with dread. The room was filled with the most influential wolves in the pack, their eyes flicking toward her as she entered, a hush falling over them as she was presented as King Arik's mate. She wore a gown of deep emerald that contrasted beautifully with her dark hair, her skin glowing under the soft lighting. Despite the beauty of the dress, Amara felt more exposed than ever. She wanted to be anywhere but here, anywhere but in the center of attention, surrounded by people who saw her only as an extension of Arik's power. Arik, standing tall beside her, caught the eye of every person in the room. His pride was palpable, his presence overwhelming, but it didn't stop the whispers that followed her every step. As she scanned the room, Amara caught sight of another alpha, a tall, dark-haired man who was talking with a few other members of the pack. His gaze shifted to her, a slow smirk crossing his face as he caught her eye. Amara couldn't help herself. She looked away, feeling uncomfortable. But before she could retreat further into the background, the alpha's brother, a younger man who resembled him, made his way toward her. He smiled charmingly and bowed slightly. "Well, well," he said with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "The king's mate no less. How fortunate for all of us." His tone was playful, almost flirtatious, and he stepped closer, his interest clearly piqued. Amara felt a rush of tension rise in her chest. She didn't want this, didn't want any of this, but she couldn't escape. She stood tall, her back straight, forcing a small smile. "It's an honor, I suppose," she said, her voice smooth but laced with sarcasm. "To be presented as the king's property." The younger alpha's eyes widened, surprised by her directness, but his smile didn't falter. "I see. Someone's not quite so impressed with the title." He stepped closer, his voice dropping slightly but still teasing. "Perhaps, then, you'd prefer to speak with someone who doesn't mind sharing a conversation with the mate of a king?" Before she could answer, a low growl rumbled from behind her. Arik appeared at her side, suddenly, his presence like a wall of force. His eyes locked onto the younger alpha, and the tension in the air shifted in an instant. "Is there a problem?" Arik's voice was low, but the danger in it was unmistakable. The younger alpha straightened, his smirk faltering as he met Arik's gaze. No problem, King Arik. Just admiring your mate's beauty." His voice faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, offering a bow. "My apologies, Your Majesty." Amara felt the heat of Arik's gaze as he turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw something like insecurity in his eyes. He clenched his jaw, his anger simmering just beneath the surface, and it was clear that the alpha's attention toward her had stirred something much darker in him. Arik's voice was a low growl as he addressed the younger alpha. "Stay away from her. She belongs to me." His words were blunt, possessive, and the finality in them made the younger alpha take a step back, bowing his head. Arik turned back to Amara, his grip tightening on her arm as he pulled her closer, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "Don't talk to anyone else like that," he warned in a low voice, almost a whisper. "You belong to me." Amara froze, feeling the weight of his words pressing against her chest. Her emotions were a whirlwind. She had power over him, had made him jealous, but the moment she saw how far he was willing to go to show that she was his, she realized just how dangerous this situation was. "I'm not your property," she muttered under her breath, but Arik's ears caught it, and he turned toward her quickly. "You will be careful with your words, Amara," he said, his tone suddenly dangerous, his hand reaching out to grip her wrist. His fury was palpable, and for a moment, she thought he might lash out. But just as quickly, his fist unclenched, and he looked down at her, his expression softening ever so slightly. "If you want respect, you'll give it in return," he said, his voice tinged with warning. Amara held her breath, fighting the urge to pull away. The moment felt like it could snap at any second, and yet, as Arik held her there, she realized that this power dynamic was only going to get worse. She had to walk the fine line between defiance and submission, between maintaining control and losing herself completely. The air between them was thick, but Arik turned away and whispered to one of his guards. "Get her some fresh air," he ordered, clearly still unsettled. As Amara looked up at him, she saw that the once unstoppable king was now visibly rattled, his insecurity creeping into the space between them. But Amara would not let him see how much she was affected. She smiled coldly, the evening stretching on. Chapter 8. Amara sat in her quarters, the weight of the evening pressing down on her like an unrelenting storm. The images of Arik's intense, possessive gaze and the way he had handled the situation with the younger alpha were burned into her mind. She couldn't shake the fear that had settled in her chest, the fear of what could have happened if Arik's jealousy had pushed him further. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. She had to understand what had just occurred. What was the real threat here? Without realizing it, she had already called for one of the palace staff to come in and answer her questions. A young woman entered the room, quiet and efficient, her face neutral as she approached. Amara didn't wait for pleasantries. "Tell me about the alpha, the one who was talking to me at the gala. The one Arik seemed to have a problem with." Her voice was steady, though the undercurrent of anxiety was clear. The staff member hesitated for just a moment, then spoke in a hushed tone. "The man's name is Talon. He is from the Blackstone Pack, a neighboring kingdom. He's known for his ambition and his connections. He would have caused quite a stir if King Arik and he had clashed. Although Arik might have won, it would have been a display of weakness, and the other packs would have noticed. It would have undermined King Arik's authority, and that could lead to complications. Many would start to question his control, and alliances could become fragile. Amara's stomach turned. She had never thought of it in such terms before. She had known Arik was powerful, but she hadn't fully understood the political weight his actions carried. To be honest, she didn't care for politics. She didn't care for this world of power plays and jealous rivals. All she wanted was to find a way out. But she couldn't ignore what had almost happened. Arik's jealousy was a powder keg waiting to explode, and she had been caught right in the middle of it. She closed her eyes again, reflecting on the dangerous proximity they had just come to. She could have easily been the spark that ignited the fire. And once the fire started, there was no telling how much damage it would do, not just to Arik's reign, but to her own freedom, her safety, and even her very life. She wondered if it was possible to control the growing emotional intensity between them. Could she stop the dangerous spiral of emotions before it consumed them both? She knew she had to try, or everything could collapse around her. Her resolve began to harden. "I won't let this escalate. I can't. She had to stop provoking him, stop putting herself in positions where Arik's jealousy could flare up. But how? She had to find a way to control the situation, to prevent herself from being trapped by his influence. Later that evening, as the weight of her thoughts settled into her chest, Amara turned to her most trusted ally, Tessa. Her mate had been with her throughout the most difficult parts of this ordeal, and Amara knew she would be the one to speak to. But even now, as she approached Tessa, Amara felt conflicted. How could she voice her fears without giving in to her vulnerabilities? Tessa, sensing the shift in Amara's mood, sat beside her, her expression soft and knowing. "What's troubling you, Your Highness?" she asked gently, though her eyes were filled with concern. Amara swallowed hard, looking away. "Arik. His jealousy is dangerous, Tessa. What happened at the gala, it could have ended so much worse. He's too possessive, too controlling. I'm scared of him. I don't know how much longer I can handle it. I can't escape him. I feel trapped in this relationship, in this life, and it's suffocating." Tessa's face softened, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. "I understand, Amara. Believe me, I do. But you have to be careful. Arik isn't a man who deals well with defiance. Pushing too hard against him might only make him more dangerous. He's not used to being challenged, and when someone challenges him, he responds with violence. You're in a delicate position. I don't want to live like this," Amara said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't want to be at his mercy, to feel like I have to walk on eggshells around him. But I also don't know what else to do. If I stay silent, if I try to please him, I lose myself. If I fight, I lose everything." Tessa sighed deeply, taking a moment before responding. "You are in a dangerous situation, but remember that you're not without options. You need to find a balance. You can't let him control you completely, but you also can't provoke him recklessly. There's power in silence, in understanding when to speak, and when to remain quiet. You need to learn when to choose your battles." Amara nodded, though the weight of it all was still heavy on her heart. "I'm scared, Tessa. I don't want to be controlled, but I also don't want to push him to the point where he does something I can't undo. What if I can't keep myself from getting hurt? What if I can't stop him?" Tessa placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Amara. But you can't do this alone. You need to find a way to protect yourself. Stay smart. Stay patient. Arik will slip up eventually, and when he does, you'll know what to do." Amara met Tessa's gaze, her eyes full of both fear and determination. "I'll figure it out. I'll protect myself. I have to." Amara sat in silence for a long time after Tessa had left, her mind reeling with the weight of the conversation. She didn't know if she could truly protect herself from Arik, but the fear that had once paralyzed her was starting to shift. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet, but she knew she had to be smart. Her heart was still heavy with the fear of what Arik might do, but now a quiet resolve began to form within her. She had to walk a fine line between submission and defiance, between protecting herself and not pushing Arik too far. She would find a way to rebuild control, to retain her independence, without losing herself to him completely. She didn't know what the path ahead looked like, but she was certain of one thing. She wouldn't let him win. Not without a fight. Amara stood in front of the door to Arik's study, her heart racing as she stared at the dark wood. The flickering candlelight from the hallway cast shadows on the door, making it seem like a barrier she wasn't sure she could cross. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, her mind torn between the need to stand up for herself and the fear of what would happen if she did. What if I push him too far? What if he doesn't listen? The questions swirled in her mind, but each one only fueled her determination to confront him. She couldn't continue to live under his control. She couldn't keep being his possession, his object to be used and discarded. No matter how much she feared what Arik might do, it was better to face him head-on than to let this suffocating tension keep building. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open, her footsteps echoing in the stillness as she walked into the study. The air in the room felt dense, heavy with the power that radiated from Arik's presence. He was seated at his desk, A pile of scrolls in front of him, his broad shoulders hunched over as he studied something with intense focus. The moment he noticed her, his posture straightened, his eyes snapping up to meet hers. "What is it, Amara?" His voice was calm, but there was a hint of irritation beneath it, as though he wasn't pleased to be interrupted. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "About the way you've been treating me." Arik raised an eyebrow, his expression guarded. He set the scrolls down, folding his arms across his chest as he leaned back in his chair. "And what, exactly, is it that you have a problem with?" The way he spoke sent a chill through her, but she pushed past it, determined to get the words out. "Your possessiveness. Your jealousy. It's dangerous. I'm not your property, Arik. You can't keep controlling me like this." The words were out before she could stop them, and for a moment, there was silence. Arik's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he stood up, the calmness of his demeanor slipping. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me how I should treat you?" His voice was low, but it carried an edge of fury. Amara stood her ground, feeling a strange surge of confidence as she spoke. "Yes, I do. You've pushed me too far. I can't keep living in this cage you've built for me. You treat me like I belong to you, but I'm my own person. I won't be controlled by you." Arik took a step forward, his presence growing more imposing as he closed the distance between them. "You are mine, Amara. You always have been. You don't get to make demands." His voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief, as though he couldn't fathom why she would defy him. "I've given you everything. Everything you need. And yet, you think you have the right to reject me." Amara's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. "You don't control me," she said fiercely, her voice cracking with the weight of her own emotions. "You can't keep me in this palace, treating me like a piece of property. I don't care what you've given me. I don't want it. I don't want this life." Arik's expression faltered for a split second, a flicker of something that might have been doubt passing through his eyes before he masked it. His gaze grew colder, harder. "You're wrong," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have no choice. You belong to me." Amara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You don't get to decide that for me. You don't get to tell me who I am or who I belong to." Arik's hands balled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, the tension in the room seemed to thicken. His chest rose and fell with each breath, his jaw clenched so tightly that Amara feared he might snap. He was angry, his eyes burning with something close to rage. But as he stared at her, something shifted. His anger simmered, and in its place, there was a flicker of doubt, something fleeting, but enough for Amara to see. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Amara's heart hammered in her chest, her breath shallow as she waited for his next move. He took a deep breath, his eyes still locked on hers, but there was a hesitation in his gaze now. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "I won't let you go, Amara," he finally said, his voice quiet, but filled with a new weight. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I won't let anyone take you from me." Amara felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood her ground. "Then you'll have to keep me locked up forever. I won't be your prisoner." Arik clenched his fists again, his face contorting with frustration. He took a step closer, but this time, his anger was tempered by something else, something almost uncertain. "I won't lose you," he said, the words coming out almost too softly. "But you'll never escape me, Amara. Not now. Not ever." The words hit her harder than she expected, and she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. She had just made her stand, just laid out her boundaries, but the realization that Arik would never let her go sent a cold wave of dread through her. The confrontation ended with both of them emotionally charged. Arik stood there, his fists still clenched, his body tense, while Amara's heart pounded in her chest, unsure of where to go from here. She had said what she needed to say, but the air between them felt even more electric, more dangerous than ever. Amara turned on her heel, her mind spinning with the words she had just heard. Arik's possessiveness was deeper than she thought, and his control over her was more suffocating than ever. She had made herself heard, but at what cost? Chapter 9. Amara and Arik stood near the large window of his private study, the faint light of the setting sun casting a soft glow over the room. The tension between them had been simmering for days, their strained conversations turning to silences, and now, in this rare moment of peace, something shifted. Arik's hand brushed against hers as they stood together, looking out over the kingdom, and in that fleeting moment, the world felt still. The distance between them seemed to shrink as their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Despite the walls they had built, there was a spark, an undeniable connection that neither could ignore. Arik stepped closer, his breath warm against her skin, his gaze intense. "Amara," he said softly, his voice low with unspoken desire. "We can't keep doing this. The tension, the distance, it's unbearable." Amara's heart raced as she turned to face him, her breath catching. Her body ached with the weight of the moment. She had fought against the bond, fought against everything Arik represented, but in this moment, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. She didn't know who moved first, but before she could stop herself, she found herself standing on tiptoe, her lips just inches away from his. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, and she felt herself being drawn to him, unable to stop the pull. But just as their lips were about to meet, a loud knock echoed through the room, shattering the fragile bubble they had created. "King Arik!" A voice called from the door, urgent and demanding. "There is an emergency meeting. The alphas are waiting." The moment was gone. Arik pulled away, his jaw tightening in frustration. He gave Amara one last lingering glance before turning toward the door. "We'll finish this later," he muttered, his voice laced with both desire and annoyance. Amara stood there, her breath uneven, her emotions swirling. Later. The word hung in the air, but she wasn't sure if she could wait. Amara made her way down the long corridors of the palace, the echoes of voices growing louder as she approached the council room. She knew Arik would be in there, but she hadn't expected the atmosphere to be so charged. The door was ajar, and she hesitated for only a moment before slipping inside unnoticed. The room was filled with the powerful alphas of the neighboring packs, their faces taut with tension. Arik stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the edges as he faced the others. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a fury that simmered just beneath the surface. "You're asking for too much," Arik snapped, his voice rising in irritation. "The resources we have are already stretched thin. I'm not giving up any more land." One of the other alphas, a tall man with a thick beard, leaned forward, his voice cold. "Your kingdom isn't the only one with needs, Arik. We all suffer when resources are hoarded by the strongest pack. This isn't just about you anymore." Amara's stomach twisted as she listened to the heated exchange. It was clear that tensions had been building for some time, but the ferocity with which the alphas spoke had her on edge. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her. A fight for resources, a dispute between the packs. It could escalate into something far worse. Arik's voice dropped dangerously low, his impatience evident. "If you think I'll give in to threats and demands, you're sorely mistaken. This kingdom is mine, and I won't let anyone dictate what I do." Amara felt a surge of frustration. She had to do something. Her pulse raced as she stepped forward, crossing the room toward the group of alphas. She knew it was dangerous, but she couldn't stay silent any longer. "I think," she began, her voice calm but firm, "there must be a way to find a compromise. We can't afford to let this escalate into something more destructive. The packs need to work together, not fight each other for resources." The room fell silent as every pair of eyes turned to her. Arik's eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched. "Amara, this is a matter of politics. Stay out of it," he said harshly, cutting her off before she could continue. Amara's chest tightened at his dismissive tone. She was used to being ignored, but not like this, not when the stakes were so high. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, her mind racing. "I'm not just some accessory to him. I have a role to play here. Arik, this isn't just about power," she said, her voice rising with a mixture of frustration and resolve. This is about the future of our kingdom. We need to think about the long-term consequences. But Arik had already turned back to the alphas, waving her words away. This is not the time for diplomacy, Amara. This is war talk. As the meeting continued, Amara's mind raced. The arguments grew louder, and the tensions in the room were palpable. Each word, each gesture, only served to stoke the fire of conflict. It was clear that the alphas were no longer interested in negotiation, they were only interested in winning. She could see it in their eyes, the growing animosity between them. The sense of unity that had once existed was unraveling, thread by thread. She knew that if something wasn't done soon, a war could be inevitable. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Amara knew that it was up to her to act. She couldn't sit by and watch the packs tear each other apart. If she didn't intervene, if she didn't find a way to resolve this, the consequences would be disastrous for everyone. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of the situation. The stakes had never been higher, and the future of the packs was hanging in the balance. It was up to her to take action, to stop the war before it started. Amara left the meeting, her mind racing. She had tried to make a difference, but her words had been brushed aside, her role ignored. But despite the dismissal, something within her had shifted. She couldn't sit idly any longer. She had to step up. Her frustration had transformed into determination. She wasn't going to let this conflict tear them apart. She had a voice, and she would make sure it was heard. The path forward wasn't clear, but Amara knew one thing for certain. If she didn't act, everything would fall apart. Amara paced restlessly in her quarters, her mind racing with the weight of the situation. The peace that had once been so carefully maintained was slipping away, and every moment she waited brought the packs closer to war. She couldn't allow that to happen, not when there was a chance to stop it. Determined, she sent word to the leaders of the other packs, summoning them to a private meeting away from Arik's watchful eye. She knew she couldn't act openly without risking his wrath, but she had no choice. This was bigger than her own personal struggle with him. This was about the future of their kingdom. The leaders arrived one by one in the hidden chamber, their faces stern and skeptical. They were all powerful alphas, each one a force to be reckoned with, and none of them seemed impressed by the young princess standing at the center of the room. "Why have you called us here, Amara?" one of the alphas, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair, asked, crossing her arms. "This is a matter for the king. What makes you think you can resolve it?" Amara met her gaze, feeling a rush of both fear and resolve. She had no choice but to face the skepticism head-on. "I believe I can mediate," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "The kingdom is on the brink of disaster, and I refuse to sit by while you all tear each other apart. I've studied each pack's needs and understand the stakes. Let me help you find a peaceful solution." The room fell silent as the alphas exchanged glances. It was clear they didn't take her seriously. She wasn't Arik, the king. She wasn't a battle-hardened alpha. She was just his mate, a princess with no real power. "You! Mediate!" The silver-haired alpha scoffed. "How can we trust you to solve something this delicate?" Amara's pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. "I understand you doubt me," she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "But if we don't act now, all of us will lose. I'm here to help. If you want peace, I can help you find it." The tension in the room was thick as Amara stood tall, refusing to be intimidated. "I've been paying attention," she continued, her tone firm and authoritative. "I know what each of you needs. The Blackstone pack needs more territory for hunting. The Red Fang pack has suffered from a lack of resources during the harsh winters, and the Silverclaw pack needs new alliances to bolster its strength." She paused, making sure each of them was listening. "We can divide the resources fairly, give each pack what it needs, and still maintain the peace. But it requires compromise. You'll have to give something up in exchange for something else. It's the only way forward." The leaders exchanged heated whispers, clearly divided on whether they could trust her judgment. The silver-haired alpha raised an eyebrow. "And you think you can just fix this with a few promises? The power struggle has gone on for too long for a simple negotiation to work." Amara swallowed her frustration. This isn't about power, it's about survival. If we don't stop fighting over land, over resources, the whole kingdom will fall apart. It's a matter of balance. You don't have to like each other, but you can agree to work together. One of the alphas from the Blackstone pack, a tall man with a sharp jaw, snorted. You're naive. You think you can fix centuries of tension with a few words? You're just a pawn in Arik's game. Amara's pulse raced, but she kept her composure. I'm not Arik's pawn. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I'll prove it to you if you'll give me the chance. The room was still tense, the alphas clearly unconvinced by her proposal. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she placed them flat on the table, leaning forward to make her final plea. You've been fighting for so long, but you know as well as I do that if we don't work together now, we're all going to lose. It's not just land or resources at stake. It's everything. Our people, our survival, our legacy. The silver-haired alpha looked at her carefully, her expression unreadable. You're putting yourself in a dangerous position, Amara. But you're not wrong. If the conflict escalates further, it will destroy everything. Amara took a deep breath, sensing the shift in the room. I'm asking you to trust me, to put aside your pride and your distrust for one moment. For the good of the packs, we need to come together. If we don't, there will be no peace left to save. The tension in the room grew thick, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Amara held her breath, waiting for their response. She could feel the fragile peace in the air, as delicate as glass, ready to shatter with the wrong word. Finally, the tall man from the Blackstone pack spoke. Fine, he said reluctantly. We'll agree to a ceasefire for now. But this isn't over. We'll see if your plan works. The others nodded, and the silver-haired alpha sighed. You've convinced us for now, Amara. But don't expect this to be easy. If your plan fails, we'll hold you accountable. Amara's heart soared with a mix of relief and fear. She had done it. She had managed to broker a ceasefire. But the tension was still there, simmering beneath the surface. The next steps were critical, and there was no turning back now. As the meeting adjourned, Amara left the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe she had done it. Despite the doubts, despite the pushback, she had successfully navigated the fragile web of power between the packs. She had proven herself as a leader, if only for a moment. But the reality of the situation still loomed. The ceasefire was just the first step, and the negotiations would be even more difficult. There was no guarantee it would last. Still, Amara felt a spark of hope, a sense of pride she hadn't felt before. She wasn't just a bystander in her own life anymore. She had power, real power, and she would use it to protect her people. As she walked down the hallway, a quiet determination filled her. This was just the beginning. She had made her move, and now was time to see it through. Chapter 10. Amara stood by the window in her quarters, her gaze distant as she looked out over the sprawling grounds of the palace. The meeting had ended, and she had done it. She had brought the alphas together. The ceasefire was in place, and for now, peace had been restored. But the sense of accomplishment she felt was quickly overshadowed by a creeping worry. Is this peace even real? She stared at the horizon, feeling a knot of doubt tightening in her chest. The tension between the packs had been there for years, and even though she had mediated a truce, she couldn't shake the feeling that the underlying issues hadn't been addressed. Would they truly abide by the ceasefire, or would it all unravel the moment something else went wrong? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her door opening. Tessa entered, offering a small smile before speaking. You've done it, Amara, she said gently, but there was a hint of caution in her voice. The alphas are on board for now, but I can see it in your eyes. You're wondering if it will last. Amara nodded, exhaling slowly. I can't help but wonder if this is just a temporary fix. The alphas are agreeing now, but what happens when the next dispute comes? What happens when they realize the ceasefire isn't enough? Tessa sighed, crossing the room to stand beside her. You've done what no one else could, Amara. You brought them to the table. That's something. Amara's gaze hardened as she stared out the window, still unsure if her efforts were enough. Maybe I've made a difference, but how long will it last? Later, as night settled over the palace, Amara sat down with Tessa in the private corner of her quarters. The events of the day weighed heavily on her, and she needed to talk. The pressure of it all, the constant fear of failure, was beginning to take its toll. "Tessa, I don't know if I can keep this up," Amara said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I feel like I've held back the storm, but what if it comes back? What if all of this, everything I've done, falls apart?" Tessa gave her a soft, reassuring smile, though her eyes reflected the same worry that Amara felt. "You've done well, Amara. You brought the Alphas together when no one thought it was possible. That's something few could do." Amara ran a hand through her hair, the weight of the responsibility pressing on her shoulders. "But it's not enough, is it? The packs are still divided. They still have their grudges. And I'm just one person. I can't keep holding this fragile piece together forever." Tessa nodded slowly, her voice gentle but firm. "The political tensions will always be there, Amara. You can't change that overnight. But you've given them a chance, something they haven't had in years. Now, the hard part is keeping it. It won't be easy, but you've shown you can handle it." Amara's heart heavy, she let out a long breath. "What do I do now, Tessa? How do I tell Arik about what I've done? I know he won't be happy with me stepping in." Tessa's expression softened, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. "You can't hide it from him forever. But be honest. Tell him what you've done, and let him see the value in it. You've shown him you have power, Amara. You just need to show him that you can handle the consequences." Amara nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I'll have to face him sooner or later." The following evening, Amara made her way to Arik's private chambers. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and a pit of uncertainty settled in her stomach. The door was slightly ajar, and she hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. Arik was sitting at his desk, papers spread out in front of him, his posture rigid and focused. His presence alone was enough to fill the room with tension. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing slightly in a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Amara," he said, his voice low, "what brings you here?" Amara stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had to be brave. She had to stand her ground. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I've made a decision. I've taken matters into my own hands." Arik raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, but his expression darkened slightly. "What have you done?" Amara took a deep breath, stepping further into the room. "I've negotiated with the Alphas. They agreed to a ceasefire. I've managed to bring them together." There was a moment of silence as Arik processed her words. His gaze turned cold, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You did what?" "I brokered a deal, Arik," she said, her voice firm. "The peace is fragile, but it's a start. I couldn't just sit by while the kingdom was on the brink of war." Arik stood slowly, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer to her. "You took a great risk, Amara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you understand that? If this fails, if this truce falls apart, it will be on your shoulders. You'll be the one held responsible." Amara's chest tightened as she met his gaze. "I understand the stakes, Arik. I know the danger, but I couldn't stand by and watch everything fall apart. I did what I thought was right." Arik stared at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've shown me something I didn't expect, Amara," he said quietly. "But don't forget, if this doesn't work, the consequences will be severe. And it won't just be your peace on the line." Amara felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety settle over her. She had done it. She had brokered a ceasefire, taken charge when everyone doubted her, and confronted the man who controlled everything. But now, the hard part had just begun. As Amara left Arik's chambers, her heart felt heavy with both a sense of accomplishment and an overwhelming fear of the future. She had done what no one else had believed possible, but now the real test began. She had brokered peace, but could she keep it? The stakes were higher than ever. And if she failed, the entire kingdom could fall into chaos. Her steps were measured as she walked down the hallway, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. She couldn't back down now. This was her fight too, and she had to see it through. Amara entered the war room with a quiet sense of pride, though it was tempered by the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. The tension between her and Arik had always been there, but today felt different. He had seen the outcome of her work, the fragile peace that she had brokered between the alphas. And yet, as he glanced up from his map, his face remained stoic, impervious to her success, his eyes guarded. "I heard you managed to convince them," Arik said, his voice flat as he stood near the large table in the center of the room, scanning a map of the territories. "Quite an achievement." Amara nodded, trying to gauge his reaction. "Yes, for now, the ceasefire holds. The packs are in agreement, temporarily." Arik turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly as he crossed his arms. "Temporarily," he echoed. "You think this peace will last?" Amara straightened, feeling a sense of pride stir in her chest despite his dismissive tone. "It's a start. We have to give it a chance." Arik sighed, clearly frustrated. "I'm not here to play games, Amara. I don't have the luxury of waiting around for things to fall apart. You may have made a deal, but it's not a solution and it's not enough." She met his gaze, her confidence faltering for a moment. His possessiveness and reluctance to accept her role was palpable, but she wouldn't let it break her resolve. "It's more than enough for now. You have to let me do this, Arik. I'm not just your mate. I'm more than that." His eyes darkened, his voice low and measured. "You're my mate. That's all you need to be. Don't forget that." Amara's stomach churned, and her pride fought against his control. She was done being held back by his limitations, but she knew she had to be careful. "His jealousy runs deep," she thought. "But I can't let that stop me." Amara stepped forward, trying to steady her thoughts, knowing she had to make her case clearly. "I understand the dangers, Arik, but this isn't just about land or power anymore. It's about the future. If the packs go to war, we all lose. I can't do this without your support." Arik's expression tightened as he turned to face her fully. "What do you think I am? Some sort of weak king who needs to rely on others for his strength?" Amara's throat tightened, but she refused to back down. "No, but you know as well as I do that the tension won't dissipate on its own. You're a warrior, Arik. You fight battles, but this is something different. We need unity, not conflict." Arik stood in silence for a long moment, studying her intently. "And you think you can hold this kingdom together without weakening yourself? Can you handle the consequences if everything falls apart?" Amara's heart skipped a beat. The challenge in his voice struck her hard, and for a moment, doubt crept in. "Can I?" She wondered. "Am I ready for this?" The weight of his challenge made her second-guess the decision she had fought so hard for. "I don't have a choice," she said finally, her voice steady. "We all have to make sacrifices. If I want to protect what we have, I have to step up. You can't do this alone, Arik. And I'm not just going to sit by and watch everything burn." Arik studied her for a long time, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. She knew the tension had shifted, but whether it was for better or worse, she couldn't yet tell. Amara stood taller, her resolve solidifying. She could feel Arik's gaze on her, but she wouldn't let it intimidate her any longer. She had made a decision, and she would see it through, no matter how much resistance she faced. "We can't go back, Arik," she said, her voice firm. "The future of the packs, the kingdom, it all depends on what I do now. I need your trust. I need you to understand that leadership isn't just about fighting battles. It's about knowing when to negotiate, when to mediate. And this is my moment to show that." Arik's face remained hard, unreadable. He stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "And what if it all fails, Amara? What if this peace doesn't hold? You'll be the one to answer for it. You'll be the one they blame." Amara's chest tightened at the weight of his words. He didn't just challenge her, he made her feel the crushing pressure of her decisions. But she wasn't going to back down now. "Then I'll take responsibility," she said, her voice laced with both fear and defiance. "But I'm not going to sit idly by and let it all slip away." Arik's eyes flickered with something that might have been respect, though it was hard to tell. He stepped closer to her, his tone quieter, more measured. You're more than just a mate, Amara. I'll give you that. But remember, this kingdom isn't soft. It's harsh, unforgiving. If you truly want to lead, you must learn to handle it all. Amara nodded, her heart pounding, but something inside her stirred. She could do this. She would do this. She wasn't just Arik's mate anymore. She was a leader in her own right. As the conversation ended, Amara left the room, her thoughts swirling. She had held her ground, but the weight of her decisions, the weight of the responsibility she had just taken on, settled heavily on her shoulders. Arik had acknowledged her ability, but the cost of this recognition was high. She wasn't just Arik's partner, she was a leader now. And with that came immense responsibility. She had to protect the fragile peace, but the challenge ahead was daunting. Amara walked down the hallway, her chest tight with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had gained Arik's recognition, but now, the stakes had never been higher. There was no turning back. Chapter 11. The dim light of the evening cast long shadows over the war room as Arik leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. His right-hand man, Riker, stood by the large map on the wall, tracing his finger over the regions that had been the subject of countless discussions for weeks. But tonight, the conversation had shifted to something more unexpected. Amara has a point, Riker said, his voice cutting through the silence. She's been pushing for a more diplomatic approach. Her suggestions about negotiating with the other packs, using a more strategic alliance instead of threats, she's not wrong. Arik's brow furrowed as he looked at Riker, his jaw tightening in irritation. Amara is a princess, Riker. What does she know of running a kingdom? She's not a warrior. She's not an alpha. She doesn't understand the weight of these decisions. Riker paused, letting the silence stretch before replying. You're wrong, Arik. She's been paying attention. She's seen the cracks in the system, and her ideas, they could work. She's already proven she has the wisdom to lead. But you've been ignoring her suggestions. Arik's gaze turned away from Riker, his fingers tapping against the desk. I've been trying to keep control, Riker. If I let her have too much influence, I lose my grip on the kingdom. I can't show weakness. Riker's expression softened. It's not about weakness. It's about trust. If you want to build something lasting, you need to let her in. She's not just your mate, Arik. She's your partner. You can't keep treating her like a pawn. Arik was silent for a long moment, his mind turning over Riker's words. He had claimed Amara as his mate out of a mixture of pride and possessiveness, wanting to prove that no one could reject him and walk away. But in the days since, he found himself growing more drawn to her, not just her beauty, but her intellect, her strength. Yet, the idea of making her his equal, that terrified him. You're right, Arik finally admitted, though the words felt like lead in his mouth. She's smart. She's been more insightful than I gave her credit for. But it's not just that, Riker. He hesitated, his chest tightening as he tried to articulate the conflicting emotions inside him. I claimed her because she rejected me. I made her mine to prove I could. But now every day I see her, I hear her, and I'm falling for her. It's becoming more than just a bond. Riker's gaze softened, a knowing look crossing his face. I understand that, Arik. But you can't let fear control you. You've spent so long thinking that you have to do everything on your own, that you can't trust anyone. But Amara is different. She's not just a piece of property to hold. She's a force in her own right. Arik ran a hand through his hair, frustration and confusion lining his face. I don't know how to do this, Riker. How do I let her in without feeling like I'm losing control? How do I trust her when everything about her, about this bond, feels like a battle? Riker stepped closer, his voice calm and firm. You start by listening. You let her be your equal, not your subordinate. Let her contribute, let her have a voice. If you want her respect, you need to respect her ideas. And that means seeing her as more than just your mate, seeing her as your partner. Arik stood up, pacing around the room as Riker's words continued to echo in his mind. The idea of seeing Amara not as his possession, but as a partner was foreign to him, something he wasn't sure he could wrap his mind around. He had always been in control, always been the one calling the shots. To relinquish even a little of that control felt like vulnerability, something he couldn't afford in a world that thrived on strength. But as the weight of Riker's advice settled over him, something inside him shifted. He had seen Amara's intelligence, her ability to think strategically, her understanding of a world that went beyond power and violence. She wasn't like the others. She had proven that she could lead, even if he hadn't fully recognized it yet. What if she could help me? He thought. What if we could do this together? A small part of him recoiled at the thought, but another part, the part that had been quietly growing stronger over time, realized that trusting her might be the only way forward. I'll listen to her, Arik finally said, his voice steady but filled with a new resolve. I'll give her a chance. But if this goes wrong, it's on both of us. Riker nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. That's all anyone can ask for, Arik. As Arik left the war room, he felt a strange mix of unease and anticipation. He knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. He had to evolve, not just as a king, but as a partner. Amara's ideas were starting to make sense to him, and if he truly wanted to secure his reign and the future of the Pax, he needed to embrace the power that she brought to the table. But even as he walked down the corridor toward her chambers, doubt lingered at the edges of his mind. Could he truly let go of his need to control everything? Could he trust Amara to be his equal, his partner? As he knocked on her door, the uncertainty still churned inside him. But there was also something else, a hope perhaps. A hope that this fragile bond, this uneasy partnership, could grow into something more. Amara stood at the edge of the gathering hall, her heart pounding as she observed the growing tension in the courtyard below. The rival pack, led by the brash and aggressive Alpha Malin, had arrived at the gates, and the air was thick with hostility. The usual diplomatic pleasantries had evaporated, and the situation was on the verge of spiraling into violence. Arik, ever the warrior, had already gathered his forces and was waiting for the right moment to step in, but Amara knew she couldn't let it escalate to that point. Not this time. Her breath caught in her throat, but she steadied herself. I can do this, she thought. I have to do this. The moment Malin's voice rang out across the courtyard, demanding a confrontation, Amara's instincts kicked in. She stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of both packs. The Alphas and their warriors fell silent, watching her every move. Enough! Amara's voice rang clear and firm, cutting through the rising tension. There will be no fighting today. This ends now. Malin's eyes flickered with surprise before narrowing in suspicion. And who are you to tell me what to do? He growled, his gaze traveling over her with disdain. You may be Arik's mate, but you're still a princess, no matter how much you want to play at being a leader. Amara's jaw clenched, but she held her ground, refusing to be intimidated. I am the one who holds the power to make this peace last, or to see it crumble. If you want a war, you're welcome to it, but know that it will not be on my terms. Malin scoffed, stepping closer, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You think you can dictate terms, little girl? You think your presence here will stop me? The tension in the air thickened, and Amara could feel the weight of every set of eyes on her. She knew this was her moment. She couldn't afford to back down, even if it meant facing the wrath of Malin and his pack. I don't want war, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. But I will not stand by while you destroy the peace we've worked so hard to build. If we fight, we both lose. I'm offering you a chance, walk away, and we'll discuss this like leaders. Malin let out a growl of frustration, clearly not accustomed to being challenged by a woman, let alone a princess. His eyes flared with anger, but Amara held his gaze, not blinking, not backing down. At that moment, Amara caught a glimpse of Arik standing at the balcony, overlooking the courtyard. His eyes were narrowed, his posture tense. She knew he was watching, but she couldn't afford to let his scrutiny distract her now. This was her battle to fight. From his vantage point, Arik's eyes narrowed as he watched Amara, noting the way she stood her ground. She's not backing down, he thought. His arms crossed over his chest. A small part of him had expected her to falter, to let Malin's intimidation get the best of her. But instead, she was holding the room, holding the situation in her hands. His pride flared, and for a moment he wanted to step in, to assert control and remind everyone who was truly in charge. But there was something about Amara's resolve, her ability to command the room without even raising her voice, that stopped him. She's proving me wrong, he thought. She's showing me she's more than just my mate. As Malin stepped forward, clearly unwilling to listen, Arik's grip on the railing tightened. The situation was fragile, and he could feel the energy in the courtyard shifting. But as much as he wanted to protect Amara, he knew he had to let her face this on her own. She needed to lead. Malin stepped closer, his face twisted in a sneer. You think you can stop me, girl? You're just a pawn in Arik's game. And I don't answer to you. Amara took a deep breath, pushing aside her fear and anxiety. This is it, she thought. This is where it ends, or it all falls apart. Her pulse raced as she stepped forward, closing the gap between them. I'm not just Arik's pawn, she said, her voice filled with quiet authority. I'm a leader in my own right, and I'll not let your arrogance tear us apart. If you want a war, we can have one, but it will not be on my terms. Malin hesitated, his expression flickering between anger and doubt. The alphas watching from the sides shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to react. Then, to Amara's surprise, Malin stepped back, his anger momentarily replaced with reluctant respect. You've got guts, princess, he muttered, though his tone was begrudging. But don't think this is over. Amara held his gaze unwavering. It will be for now. You'll leave with your pride intact, and we'll talk terms later. This isn't the time for bloodshed. Malin looked at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling as if weighing his options. Finally, he nodded sharply, signaling to his warriors to retreat. For now, he said, turning on his heel. But remember this, princess. Next time, you won't have the luxury of speaking to me like this. As the rival pack began to retreat, Amara stood tall, feeling a rush of victory and relief flood through her. She had done it. She had kept the peace. Her heart still raced, but the tension had lifted, and the courtyard was quiet once more. Amara stood in the middle of the courtyard, watching the rival pack retreat into the distance. Her hands were trembling, but there was a sense of triumph in her chest. She had done it. She had kept the peace, and more importantly, she had proven to herself, and to Arik, that she was capable of leading in her own right. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she glanced up toward Arik, who was still watching from above. She saw the faintest nod from him, the briefest acknowledgement of her success. It was enough. But as the adrenaline of the moment began to wear off, a quiet sense of responsibility settled over her. This was just the beginning. The path to maintaining peace would be just as difficult as getting there. As she turned and walked away from the courtyard, Amara felt a growing sense of purpose. I can do this. I can lead, and nothing will stop me. Chapter 12. Arik stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the kingdom as the sun dipped below the horizon. His mind replayed the events of the last few days, the way Amara had taken control during the confrontation with the rival pack, how she had brokered peace when no one else could, and the way she had spoken with authority in the war room. For the first time, he found himself unable to dismiss her actions as mere coincidence or luck. She's capable, he thought, his fingers tightening around the railing. She's not just a princess or my mate. She's proven herself. She's made a real difference. He exhaled sharply, turning away from the view and walking deeper into the room. His thoughts were clouded, a mix of admiration and confusion swirling in his chest. He had always seen Amara as a rebellious force, something to control. She was his, marked and bound by their fated bond. But now, every time she spoke, he found himself listening, not just as her mate, but as a king considering the weight of her ideas. He ran a hand through his hair, a grimace crossing his face. But she's still my mate, my partner by fate, but does that mean she should be my partner in ruling? He paced the room, the clash between his pride and the respect he felt for her growing stronger. I've fought for control all my life. If I give her too much power, if I let her be an equal, I'll lose my grip. I can't afford to lose control. Arik's mind raced as he walked to the study, where his trusted advisor, Kellen, was waiting for him. Kellen had been by his side through many battles, offering sound counsel. But today, Arik needed someone to help him make sense of his internal turmoil. "Kellen," Arik began, his voice edged with frustration, "I need your perspective on something." He ran a hand over his face, his shoulders tense. "Amara, she's becoming more than just my mate. She's been stepping up, taking charge, solving problems, and people are noticing. She's showing a strength I didn't expect. I can't deny it any longer. She's been more helpful than I thought she'd be." Kellen, sitting with his back straight and his expression neutral, listened attentively, but a flicker of concern passed over his face. "You're worried, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low but knowing. "You're worried she's starting to overshadow you." Arik scowled, his chest tightening at the implication. "I'm not worried," he said defensively. "I just don't know if I can let her do it. She's my mate, Kellen, not my equal." "Not yet." Kellen leaned forward slightly, his gaze serious. "You can't afford to lose control, Arik. You've worked too hard to get where you are. If you let her take too much power, you risk undermining your authority. Others will see her as the true leader, and you'll become just another figurehead." Arik's jaw tightened, the weight of Kellen's words sinking in. He had always been the one in charge. Arik had fought his entire life to command the respect of his pack, to earn the power he now wielded. The idea of Amara usurping that, becoming the one people looked to for guidance, gnawed at him. But despite his discomfort, a part of him couldn't deny the respect he felt for Amara's leadership. Her quick thinking, her ability to remain calm under pressure, her strategic mind, she was proving herself, and that stung more than he cared to admit. Arik sat in silence, mulling over Kellen's words. The advisor's logic made sense, but it didn't sit well with him. Every time Amara spoke, she revealed more of the leader he had always longed to be, one who could command with intelligence and understanding, not just fear and brute strength. The fear of losing control, of letting her be seen as his equal, still lingered in his mind. He had never been one to share power easily, and he feared what might happen if he gave in to her growing influence. But another part of him, the part that admired her strength, couldn't help but feel that she was exactly what this kingdom needed. "She's not just my mate. She's my partner," he thought, his chest tightening. "But can I really accept that?" He ran a hand through his hair again, letting out a frustrated sigh. "I need her, but I can't lose everything I've fought for. I can't let her take everything from me." And yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't losing control, he was gaining something. With Amara at his side, the kingdom could thrive in ways he never imagined. She was the balance he needed. But that thought, accepting her as an equal, felt like both a victory and a defeat. He walked to the window, his hands gripping the frame as he looked out over the land. "If I don't embrace this," he thought, "we'll never truly be a team. But I have to be careful. I can't let her take over. I have to make sure I'm still the one in charge." As Arik stared out over the kingdom, he felt the weight of the decision before him. He could no longer deny that Amara was an invaluable ally, someone who could lead alongside him. But the fear of losing control, of showing weakness, remained. His pride and love for her were tangled together, creating a storm of emotions he wasn't sure how to navigate. But for the first time, Arik knew one thing for certain: Amara's strength was no longer something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. She had earned her place at his side, but the question remained, could he allow her to become his equal without losing himself in the process? The sun had set, casting the palace in a soft, golden light as Arik and Amara stood on the balcony together, overlooking the vast expanse of the kingdom. It had been a long day, one filled with meetings and tense discussions, but now there was a rare moment of quiet between them. The distant murmur of the kingdom below was the only sound, a peaceful contrast to the chaos of their daily lives. Amara leaned against the railing, her hands clasped in front of her as she gazed out at the horizon. She could feel Arik's presence beside her, but for the first time, he wasn't the domineering figure he often portrayed. There was something different in his silence tonight. "You know," Arik's voice broke the silence, his tone surprisingly soft. "I never thought I'd be here, standing alongside someone like you in this position." Amara turned to face him, sensing the unusual vulnerability in his words. His jaw was clenched, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "I've spent so long thinking that power and control were the only things that mattered," he continued, his gaze turning inward. I never thought I'd have to share that. But here we are. I've watched you, Amara. You've stepped into a role I never expected, one that even I didn't think you could handle. And now, I find myself questioning." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. His posture was tense, as though he was afraid of admitting what he felt. Amara's heart skipped a beat as she studied him. For all the arrogance and confidence he exuded, this rare moment of doubt seemed to strip him bare, exposing a side of him that he had always kept hidden. Amara took a slow step closer, her gaze softening as she studied him. He's scared, she thought, sensing the uncertainty beneath his facade. "Arik," she said gently, "you don't have to do this alone. We don't have to fight for control all the time. If we work together, we could be stronger than any of us could be alone. You're not losing power by letting me help." Arik's jaw clenched at her words, and she saw the internal struggle playing out on his face. He looked away, his gaze distant, as if he was wrestling with some unspoken fear. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice low. "This kingdom, everything I've worked for, everything I've fought for, it's mine. I've earned it. I can't just share it." Amara took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the realization that Arik's pride and fear were holding him back from seeing the truth. "I know you've earned it," she said softly, "but the kingdom isn't just about power and control. It's about the people. If you only see it as something to be guarded, you'll never see how strong it could be if we work together." She stepped closer, her voice firm but kind. "I don't want to take anything from you, Arik. I want to stand beside you. I want us to build something together. You're not weak for trusting me. You're stronger than you think." For a moment, Arik didn't respond. The silence between them felt thick, as if the weight of their conversation hung in the air. Amara felt a pang of doubt, unsure if she had gotten through to him. But then, slowly, he turned back to her, his eyes softer than before. "You really believe that?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with a hint of vulnerability. Amara nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and understanding. "I do. I believe in you. And I believe in us." Arik was silent for a long moment, as if the weight of her words was sinking in. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, his posture relaxing slightly. "I've always had to do things my way. I've been afraid that if I share too much, I'll lose control. But maybe you're right." He looked at her then, his gaze searching her face, as if seeing her for the first time in a new light. "Maybe we can do this together. Maybe we don't have to keep fighting for control." Amara's chest tightened with a sense of accomplishment, but the realization that this was only the beginning made her heart beat faster. They were on the brink of something new, something that could change everything between them. But there was still a long road ahead. As they stood together, the silence between them felt less heavy now, the air filled with the unspoken promise of something more. Amara realized that this moment, this conversation, marked a turning point. Arik was beginning to see her not just as his mate, but as a partner. He was beginning to understand that their strength, their future, didn't lie in domination or control, it lay in collaboration. But even as they took this first step toward each other, Amara could sense the unease in Arik's expression. He was still struggling with his pride, still hesitant to fully embrace the partnership she was offering. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they were walking it together. Arik turned to her, his voice steady but with a faint tremor of uncertainty. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly. "Together." Amara's heart swelled with something she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something stronger. She smiled, though her thoughts were already turning toward the future. "This is just the beginning," she thought. "We have a long way to go, but we'll get there." Chapter 13. Amara sat in the grand sitting room of the palace, the flickering fire casting shadows across the walls. She had told herself 1,000 times that she couldn't let her emotions get tangled with Arik's. He was a ruthless king, and she was his mate, a title that, despite its power, left her feeling like a pawn in a game she never agreed to play. She had been spending more time with him lately, trying to distance herself emotionally, but each time their paths crossed, it felt harder and harder to maintain that distance. He was everything she had fought against. The way he ruled with an iron fist, the way he commanded respect with a single look, it stirred something deep within her, something she couldn't ignore. Tonight, he had invited her to join him by the fire. He had been speaking about the kingdom, as always, his voice steady and firm. She tried to focus on his words, to listen to his strategies for strengthening their alliances, but her mind kept wandering back to him. His presence was magnetic, overwhelming. Each word he spoke seemed to echo in her chest. Amara shifted in her seat, trying to ignore the way her heart raced when he spoke. She had to stay focused. Don't let him in, she reminded herself. Don't let him control you. I remember my father, Arik said suddenly, his voice lowering slightly as if lost in thought. He ruled with strength. His reign was built on the belief that weakness was a liability. His word was law, and there was no room for questioning. He paused, his gaze flicking toward her. Some say it was the only way to maintain order. I don't know if I believe that anymore. Amara blinked, her attention snapping back to him. She had heard bits of his story before, but hearing it again now in the quiet of the room made something shift inside her. Arik was the product of his father's legacy, a king built from the same harsh mold. His voice carried the weight of that upbringing, the cold authority that had shaped him into the man he was now. Is that what you want? She wondered, her heart tightening. Do you want me to bow to you the way your father ruled, with fear and strength? Arik continued, seemingly unaware of the turmoil stirring inside her. He taught me that power is something you take. You don't wait for it to be given to you. Amara swallowed hard, trying to push the uncomfortable thoughts aside. She wanted to argue. She wanted to challenge his beliefs, but when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. His eyes were fixed on her, and she was suddenly acutely aware of every inch of space between them. She felt drawn to him, even though everything inside her screamed for distance. The silence between them grew heavy as she absorbed his words, the fire crackling in the hearth beside them. She couldn't ignore the pull she felt every time Arik spoke, every time he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Despite everything she feared about him, there was something undeniably magnetic about him, his strength, his confidence, the way he made her feel protected even in his silence. Amara's thoughts swirled, each one more conflicted than the last. She hated how much she needed him, how she had begun to rely on his presence to feel safe, even in this palace. The way he stood in the room, so sure of himself, so certain in his command, it made her feel both drawn to him and repulsed by what that could mean. Her breath caught in her throat when Arik turned his gaze toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if sensing her inner struggle. You don't believe me, do you? He asked quietly, his voice tinged with something almost vulnerable. Amara shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her mind. It's not that, she replied softly. I just don't know if it's the kind of world I want to live in. His lips curled into a slight smile, one that was more enigmatic than reassuring. A world of strength. You think I've built this kingdom through kindness alone? No, she whispered, unable to meet his gaze. But I don't want to live in a world where strength is the only thing that matters. As the firelight flickered across Arik's face, Amara felt a strange pull deep inside her chest, a pull she couldn't deny. She was in love with him. She had known it for some time, but saying it aloud would make it real. And the truth of that made her feel both vulnerable and terrified. I can't love him, she thought desperately. He controls everything. He controls me. I can't lose myself in him. Her mind raced with contradictions. Arik was everything she had been taught to resist. But every time she looked at him, every time his presence filled the room, she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the warmth that spread through her when their hands brushed. She had always been independent, fighting to maintain control of her own life, and now, with him, everything felt blurred. I think you'll understand one day. Arik's voice broke through her thoughts. This kingdom can't afford to be weak, and neither can you. His words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of his expectations. But inside her, something shifted. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, realizing that she was falling for him, falling for the very man she feared would swallow her whole. I don't want to be swallowed, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it to him or to herself. The weight of her confession hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. She could feel her resolve slipping away with every passing second. Arik's gaze never left her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something softer, more human. I never wanted this, Amara said softly, her voice filled with emotion. I never wanted to feel this way about you. Arik stepped closer, his hand gently lifting her chin, so she met his gaze. His voice was low, almost a whisper. You don't have to be afraid of it, Amara. She swallowed, her heart racing as his words settled into her chest. But the fear still lingered. What will this mean for me? What will it mean for us? The conversation lingered, and as Arik spoke, Amara felt the walls she had built inside her begin to crumble. His words, his presence, his strength, all of it was overwhelming, pulling her closer, deeper into a place she wasn't sure she was ready to go. She stepped back slowly, breaking the fragile connection between them. I need time, she said, her voice shaky. Arik watched her closely, a quiet understanding in his gaze. I'll give you time, he said quietly, but there was an edge to his voice, a hint of vulnerability that he didn't normally show. Amara nodded, turning away from him, her heart a tumult of emotions she couldn't quite sort. I love him, she thought, but I'm losing myself in him. As she retreated into the solitude of her quarters, her heart felt heavy with confusion. She wanted to be with him, but every part of her screamed that if she let him in completely, she would lose herself forever. Amara stood by the tall windows of her quarters, gazing out at the world beyond the palace walls. The view was beautiful, the lush greenery of the kingdom stretching for miles. But it felt distant, like a life she could no longer touch. Since her arrival at the palace, she had hardly left the confines of her chambers, always under the watchful eyes of the guards. She needed air, freedom, space to think. Arik, she began, her voice soft but firm. I need to go outside. I haven't left this place since I arrived. Arik was sitting at his desk, papers spread before him, but at her words he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered her request. His gaze flickered to the guard station just outside the door, then back to her. I don't want you wandering off alone, he said, his voice tinged with concern. It's dangerous, and I can't have you running away. You belong here now, Amara. If you leave, it might send the wrong message. Amara felt a flash of frustration at his possessiveness. She was not a prisoner, but the way he spoke made her feel like one. I'm not going anywhere, Arik, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I just need some time to breathe, to think. He stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing his options. Finally, he let out a long breath, his shoulders stiff. Fine, he said. But you'll be followed by guards. I'm not taking any chances. Amara nodded, trying to hide the irritation that simmered beneath her skin. She appreciated the rare opportunity to get out of the palace, but she hated how much control he exerted over her every move. Amara stepped out of the palace gates, the cool breeze lifting her hair as she walked beside Tessa, her closest maid. The guards trailed behind them, keeping their distance, but Amara didn't care. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was free, if only for a few moments. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the kingdom bustling around them. But Amara's thoughts were loud in her mind, and soon she found herself speaking them aloud. I don't know what to do, Tessa, she said, her voice quiet but filled with the weight of her emotions. Every time I try to fight it, I get pulled back. Arik, he's strong, he's everything I never wanted in a partner, but I can't help how I feel. I think I'm falling for him. Tessa glanced at her, concern in her eyes. "Amara," she said gently, "you've always been so independent. You can't lose yourself in him. I know you love him, but you have to be careful. His ruthlessness, his need to control, it will swallow you if you let it. Don't forget who you are." Amara stopped walking, her gaze dropping to the ground. She hadn't realized how much her feelings for Arik had started to cloud her judgment. Her heart ached with the thought of losing herself, of becoming nothing more than a reflection of his desires. "I don't know how to balance it, Tessa," she confessed. "Every part of me wants to be with him, but every part of me fears what that will mean for me. Can I really love him without losing everything I've worked for?" Tessa placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Amara. But you have to decide what kind of life you want. Don't let Arik's world swallow you whole. You have to stay true to who you are." As they continued walking, Amara's thoughts were interrupted by the laughter of children playing in the village square. Her heart fluttered at the sight. Children running, their laughter ringing out like music to her ears. She hadn't realized how much she missed the simplicity of life, the innocence of those who weren't bound by power or politics. She smiled, stepping toward them. Without thinking, she crouched down, laughing as one of the children ran up to her, pulling at her skirts. "Can I play too?" she asked, her voice light with the joy of the moment. The children surrounded her, and for the next few minutes, she was lost in the playful chaos. They ran, they giggled, and she joined in, her worries forgotten for a while. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like herself again. As she laughed with them, Amara caught sight of Arik standing a short distance away, watching her intently. His face was hard to read, but there was something in his eyes, something soft, something that didn't fit with the ruthless king he showed to the world. She felt a pang in her chest, wondering if he would ever be able to fully let go of his control, to allow her the freedom she so desperately needed. Later, as the sun began to set, Amara and Tessa began making their way back to the palace. The walk had been brief, but the weight of the conversation with Tessa, combined with the sight of Arik watching her, lingered in her mind. Could she love Arik and still keep herself? Could she maintain her autonomy while being with a man who ruled with such a strong hand? She wanted to believe it was possible, but the more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. His strength, his dominance, were intoxicating, but they also frightened her. And what of him? Did he love her? Or was she just another conquest, another thing for him to possess? Amara couldn't answer that, not yet. She couldn't even answer whether she wanted to keep fighting against him. As she neared the palace gates, she couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder. Arik was still standing there, his gaze lingering on her as if waiting for her to make a decision. She wondered if he, too, was struggling with the same question. Could he truly allow her the freedom she needed without losing himself in the process? Amara entered the palace, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She had wanted so badly to break free from the confines of her emotions, to reconcile the love she felt for Arik with the fear of losing herself in his world. But as she closed the door behind her, the walls of the palace seemed to close in around her once again. The laughter of the children and the brief respite outside felt like a distant memory. Her emotions were a whirlwind, and she couldn't stop the flood of doubt that overtook her. She wasn't sure what was more terrifying, losing herself to Arik or walking away from him altogether. Amara sank into a chair, her head in her hands, feeling more confused and torn than ever before. What if I'm not strong enough to handle this? She wondered. What if I lose everything, including myself? The uncertainty gripped her heart as she faced the overwhelming complexity of her feelings for Arik. Chapter 14. Amara walked through the corridors of the palace, her mind racing with the decision she had to make. The air felt heavier today, as if the weight of her thoughts had become too much to bear. She couldn't keep suppressing her feelings, not anymore. She had to know, was Arik the man she could love, or was she destined to be nothing more than his possession? She had watched him from afar, observed his control over everything around him. Yet, there was a part of her that still hoped, still believed that beneath the king's commanding exterior, there was a man who could be more, who could see her as an equal. But how could she be sure if he never showed her anything but his dominance? I need to know, she thought as she paused outside his study, gathering the strength to confront him. She didn't want to hide anymore. She didn't want to be afraid. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Arik was seated at his desk, papers scattered in front of him as usual. But the moment he looked up, Amara knew she was about to confront the hardest conversation of her life. "Arik," she began, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "I need to talk to you. About us." His eyes flickered, a flicker of curiosity passing through his usually impassive gaze. He set the papers down, but his posture remained tense, the air between them still charged with his commanding presence. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his tone dismissive, as if he already expected her to say something trivial. Amara swallowed, gathering her thoughts. She had to break through his wall, had to make him understand how important this conversation was to her. I need to understand where we stand," she said, taking a small step forward. "I need to understand if you value me as more than just your mate. Do you see me as your partner, Arik, or am I just another possession for you to control?" Arik's eyes darkened at her words, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. He stood up from his desk, towering over her, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more guarded. "What's really bothering you, Amara?" he asked, his voice low, his gaze sharp. "You've been distant. You've been avoiding me, as if you're afraid of something. Speak your mind." Amara's breath caught in her throat. His tone was commanding, as always, and it made her feel small, as if she had no room to speak freely. She wanted to fight against it, to stand her ground, but his presence had a way of overwhelming her. She clenched her fists at her sides, taking a deep breath. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm afraid of losing myself in you. You control everything, Arik. Every decision, every move. I just need to know if I'm worth something more to you than just your property." Arik's jaw tightened at her words, and for a moment, Amara feared she had pushed too far. But before she could say anything else, he moved closer to her, his presence almost suffocating. "You've never had a problem with my control before, Amara," he said, his voice harsh. "It kept us alive, kept the kingdom safe. What more do you want from me?" The walls around Amara seemed to close in, and her frustration boiled over. She could feel the anger bubbling in her chest, but it wasn't just anger, it was fear. Fear that Arik would never see her as his equal, fear that she would always be at the mercy of his dominance. "No, Arik," she said, her voice stronger now. "I don't want to live in a world where I'm just a tool to you. I don't want to be with you only because I was marked. I want you to see me, really see me as your equal, not as something you own." Arik's face twisted in a flash of anger. He stepped back, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think this is about ownership?" he spat. "This kingdom, everything I've done is about power. You think I've built this empire for nothing? If you can't see that, then maybe you don't understand me at all." Amara's heart raced as the words hung in the air between them. She felt the cold distance between them widening, and her anger turned to hurt. "I'm not asking for your empire, Arik. I'm asking for you to value me. For me. Not just because you need me to be your mate." Arik's gaze shifted, and for the briefest moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something like regret or doubt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the mask of a king who couldn't afford to show weakness. Amara felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The emotional turmoil that had built up inside her now felt unbearable. She had wanted so badly for this conversation to lead to something, some understanding between them. But instead, she felt more lost than ever. She turned away, the tears threatening to rise, but she fought them back. This isn't how it was supposed to go, she thought, her voice shaky as she whispered to herself. "I'm still not enough. I'm still not seen. I can't do this, Arik," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure out who I am before I can be with you." She made her way to the door, her steps heavy, feeling as though the weight of their conversation had drained the last bit of strength she had left. She didn't turn around, didn't look at him again. The silence that followed felt final. As Amara stepped out of the study, the door shutting behind her with a quiet thud, she felt a crushing weight of defeat. She had wanted answers, clarity, but instead, she felt more conflicted than ever. Arik's dominance, his refusal to truly listen, had pushed her further away. And yet, despite everything, her love for him still lingered, like an open wound she couldn't heal. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't reconcile. Was love really enough? She thought, could I really love him and keep myself? The uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her feeling more alone than ever. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the wall in front of her. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her fingers pressing into her palms as if she could somehow hold herself together. The conversation with Arik replayed in her mind over and over, each word echoing in her thoughts like a drumbeat she couldn't escape. Why couldn't he understand? Why did he have to push me away like that? Her chest tightened, and a wave of frustration washed over her. She had tried to be honest, to express her fears, to show him that she wasn't just another part of his kingdom to control. But instead of hearing her, he had shut her down. She had asked for respect, for partnership, and he had only given her silence in return. Does he even care about me? Or am I just a piece of his strategy? Amara's heart sank as doubt clouded her mind. She loved him, but the distance he kept, his need for control, made her question whether their bond could ever truly be what she needed. She had hoped for an equal relationship, but the reality felt too far out of reach. Amara stood and paced across her room, the air thick with the weight of her thoughts. She couldn't stay in this limbo, caught between her love for him and her need for independence. The emotional pull of their bond was undeniable, but she couldn't allow herself to lose sight of who she was in the process. I need space, she thought, her voice almost a whisper to herself. I can't keep doing this. I need time to think, to figure out what I really want. Her heart ached with the thought of distancing herself from Arik. The bond between them was like a constant hum, a tether she couldn't quite sever, but she knew she needed clarity. Amara walked over to the window and looked out at the kingdom stretching below. She felt the weight of his presence, even though he wasn't near. How am I supposed to separate myself from him when I feel him everywhere? She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. This isn't fair. Meanwhile, in a separate part of the palace, Arik sat at the head of a long table, the alphas of neighboring packs surrounding him for a strategic meeting. His thoughts, however, were far from the matters at hand. The conversation with Amara lingered in his mind, a storm he couldn't quiet. The weight of her words, the pain in her eyes, had stayed with him long after she left. Why is it so hard to just understand each other? He thought, rubbing his temples in frustration. I need her, but why can't I let her in? Why does everything feel so complicated? His mind kept drifting back to her, and before he realized it, the conversation in the room had slowed, with the other alphas eyeing him curiously. One of them cleared his throat, trying to regain Arik's attention. But Arik couldn't focus. His hand subconsciously reached up to rub the back of his neck, his mind still swirling with confusion. Arik, one of the alphas called, his voice a mix of concern and irritation. You're distracted. This meeting is important. Arik's eyes snapped back to the table, and he gave a small, apologetic nod. I'm sorry, he muttered, standing up abruptly. This meeting is over. We'll continue later. He didn't wait for another word before striding out of the room, his thoughts still consumed by Amara. He was frustrated, angry at himself for not being able to find the right words with her. He needed her, but he didn't know how to show her without losing his control. As Arik retreated to his chambers, Amara found herself standing in front of the mirror in her own room, staring at her reflection. Her expression was pained, but there was something new beneath the surface, something shifting. For the first time in days, she wasn't filled with just confusion and doubt. She was starting to realize that her worth didn't depend on Arik's approval. She had loved him, and she still did, but she couldn't let herself fall apart just to fit into his world. She had to be strong for herself, for her future. Her resolve hardened as she looked herself in the eyes. I don't need to lose myself in him. I can be with him, but I need to be me too. She sighed deeply, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way forward. She had to take control of her own life, even if it meant stepping back from Arik for a while. Arik sat in the silence of his chambers, his mind racing with thoughts of Amara. He had tried to reach her, tried to control the situation, but now he realized how much he had been pushing her away. She needs space, he thought, but it only made the ache inside him grow. But how do I give her space without losing her? In the end, neither of them knew how to move forward. Both were uncertain, both filled with emotions they didn't know how to handle. The love they shared was clear, but so was the distance between them. Amara was left wondering if she was strong enough to navigate this love without losing herself. And Arik was left wondering if he could ever truly let her in without sacrificing the control he had spent his life fighting for. The future of their relationship was uncertain, and the path forward was shrouded in doubt. Chapter 15. Amara sat alone in her quarters, the candlelight casting soft shadows on the stone walls. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She had spent the past few days trying to suppress her feelings, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety that had been eating away at her ever since her confrontation with Arik. But now, alone with her thoughts, the weight of everything she had been avoiding finally came crashing down on her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, her chest tightening. Why am I so afraid of him? She wondered. Why is it so hard to just speak my mind? Her mind replayed the moments she had spent with Arik, the cold, commanding way he spoke, the way he expected obedience at all costs. She had tried to fight it, tried to convince herself that her love for him could somehow make everything better. But the truth was, she was suffocating under his demands. She couldn't keep ignoring the fact that his ruthlessness was too much for her. I need to tell him how I feel, she thought. I need to be honest, even if it means walking away. I can't keep pretending this is okay. Amara stood up from her seat and walked to the window, looking out over the kingdom. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the palace walls, but it felt like an omen. If I don't speak up now, she thought, I may lose myself in this relationship forever. With a newfound sense of determination, Amara made her way to Arik's study. Her heart raced with every step, but she kept her posture strong, determined not to let her nerves show. When she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the handle. What if he doesn't understand? What if this just makes things worse? Her mind flashed with all the potential outcomes, most of them not favorable. But she had come too far to turn back now. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Arik looked up from his desk, his eyes hard as they met hers. His cool demeanor sent a shiver down her spine, making her stomach twist with unease. Why does he always look so distant? Amara thought bitterly. She had never felt more alone with him, even though he was standing right in front of her. She opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. Can I really do this? Arik's voice broke the silence, his tone as authoritative as always. What brings you here, Amara? He asked, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. It was as if he had already dismissed her, already assumed what she would say. The distance between them, the coldness in his tone, made it even harder to speak. Amara took a step forward, her hands trembling at her sides, but she couldn't back down. I need to talk to you, Amara finally said, her voice steady but her insides shaking. I can't keep living like this. Your demands, your ruthlessness, it's too much for me. Arik's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't move from behind his desk. His gaze hardened. What are you saying, Amara? Are you rejecting me because of my nature? Because of what it takes to lead this kingdom? Amara swallowed hard, her throat dry. The words she had rehearsed in her mind seemed to fade the moment they left her lips. I'm not rejecting you, Arik. I'm rejecting the way you control everything, the way you treat me like I'm just another part of your kingdom. You're so demanding, so cold, and I She paused, trying to gather her thoughts, but the frustration and fear surged. I can't be with you like this. I can't keep losing myself in you. I need more than just being your mate. I need respect. I need space. I need to feel like an equal. But I don't think you'll ever see me that way. Not truly. Arik's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. His gaze turned colder, his lips tightening as he processed her words. So this is about fear, then? He asked, his voice laced with anger. You think I'm too much for you to handle? That's why you're running from me. Amara shook her head, a lump rising in her throat. It's not about fear. It's about respect. I can't live under your control, Arik. I need to know that you value me for who I am, not just for what I represent as your mate. Arik stood up, his presence towering over her, but Amara didn't back down. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she felt a strange sense of release. She had said what she needed to say. It was out in the open now, even if the outcome wasn't what she had hoped for. Arik's gaze softened for a brief moment, his walls cracking just slightly. I never wanted to control you, Amara, he said, his voice quieter, though still tinged with frustration. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing what was best for us. Amara's breath caught, but she couldn't let herself be swayed. She had to stand firm, even if the words hurt. Protecting me? Arik, I'm not a thing to be protected. I'm a person. And right now, it feels like you only want to keep me safe for your own sake, for your image, for your kingdom. I don't want to be just your possession anymore. Arik's expression shifted as he stepped closer to her, his face conflicted. I don't want to lose you, Amara, he admitted softly. I don't know how to let go of what I've built. How to let someone else in. Amara felt her heart ache at his words, but she couldn't ignore the truth in them. She had asked for more than he could give, and perhaps it wasn't fair to expect him to change overnight. But her own heart was clear now. I need to think, she said, her voice quieter but resolute. I can't make any more decisions until I know what I really want. But I can't stay in this limbo. Not anymore. Amara turned to leave, her heart heavy with the uncertainty of the future. Arik watched her, his face unreadable. He didn't call after her, but the silence between them spoke volumes. They had both laid their truths bare, but it didn't feel like a resolution. It felt like the beginning of something more complicated, something they would have to navigate together, even if they couldn't see the way forward yet. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Arik standing in the middle of the room, conflicted. He hadn't expected this conversation to be so difficult, and now he wasn't sure how to move forward. He couldn't ignore his feelings for her, but could he truly change for her? Could he let go of his control? Amara, too, was left with the weight of uncertainty. She had spoken her truth, but the future still seemed uncertain. Will we ever be able to find balance between us? She wondered. The tension between them hung in the air, unresolved and thick with the promise of more to come. After Amara had left, Arik stood in the center of his study, the room eerily quiet around him. His thoughts churned, and his frustration swelled. She had rejected him, and worse, she had rejected everything he stood for. Her words still ring in my head, he thought bitterly, running a hand through his hair. She says I control everything, but I've built this kingdom from nothing. How could she not see the importance of that? He paced back and forth, his fists clenched at his sides. The pride he had worked so hard to build, the power he had cultivated, felt suddenly fragile in the face of Amara's confrontation. His mind wanted to lash out, to demand that she take it back, but a small voice in the back of his mind told him he had to listen. I gave her everything. What more does she want? Arik's thoughts spiraled. The confidence he usually wore like armor felt heavy now, suffocating. He tried to push the discomfort away, but it lingered, gnawing at his thoughts. His anger surged when he finally spoke aloud. She doesn't understand. I've done this for us, for our future. If I give in, if I let her think she can change me, what will that make me? Weak! Arik slammed his fist against the desk. His whole life had been about control, about strength, about never showing weakness. If Amara didn't respect that, Then what was the point? As the minutes passed, Arik's mind slowly began to quiet, and Amara's words started to echo in his ears. She's right, he admitted reluctantly. I've pushed her away by demanding too much. I've made her feel small by treating her as something to be controlled. His eyes narrowed as he leaned against the desk, staring out of the window at the kingdom below. The realization hit him like a weight in his chest, a dull ache that wouldn't go away. I never saw her as an equal. Not really. Not until now. But the fear he had long suppressed crept up again. If I give her space, if I allow her to speak freely, what will happen? Will I lose everything I've worked for? Arik's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. He had always believed in the power of strength, of dominance. Yet here was Amara, speaking of respect, of partnership, of being seen as something more than just a possession. She had rejected him, but her words also made him question the very foundation of his reign. As the weight of the situation settled in, Arik's pride began to crack, though slowly and painfully. He had spent so many years thinking that control was the key to everything, his rule, his power, his ability to protect what mattered. But in this moment, he saw a different truth. Amara was not just a beautiful woman to be controlled. She was a force in her own right. His chest tightened as he thought of how easily she had spoken her mind, how she had stood up to him even when he made it clear that he was the king. Her strength, he thought, her intelligence, she's more than just my mate. She could be my partner. But admitting that, acknowledging that she was more than just a part of his kingdom's politics, was harder than Arik wanted to admit. He had always kept a wall up, a barrier that made sure no one could get too close. He couldn't afford to let anyone see his vulnerability, especially not Amara. With a deep breath, he turned away from the window and walked toward the fireplace. His hands gripped the mantel, his mind still spinning. But what if I do need her? What if I'm not strong enough without her? He glanced over at the door, his thoughts lingering on her words. Maybe she's right. Maybe I've been wrong about this all along. Arik's pride was no longer the solid wall it had once been. He was conflicted. His need for control still clung to him, but something had shifted. The truth Amara had spoken was uncomfortable, but undeniable. As the evening wore on, Arik found himself pacing again, his thoughts a swirl of uncertainty. He knew Amara had been right to question him. She had pushed him in a way no one ever had. But the fear of losing control, of becoming weak in her eyes, of giving her too much power, remained. His chest tightened, his mind split. I can't be weak. I can't let go completely, he thought, but deep down, he knew that change was coming, whether he liked it or not. His feelings for her were real, undeniable, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges. Arik sank into a chair, running a hand over his face, feeling the weight of his own conflict. Amara had made him see the cracks in his fortress. He was no longer certain he could keep living in the same way. Maybe it's time to let her in, he thought, but the idea scared him more than anything. Arik was starting to change, slowly, painfully, but it was happening. His walls were coming down, but they were still high, still heavy with his pride and insecurities. He now saw Amara's strength, her intelligence, her worth as something more than just an obligation. Yet, as he sat there, the gravity of his internal conflict weighed on him. His fear of losing control was still present, but so was a new awareness that Amara could be his equal if he let her. The problem was, he wasn't sure how to let go of what he had always known. And so, with a deep sigh, Arik made a decision. He would need to find a way to balance his need for control with the respect he now felt for her. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he knew he had to try. As the night drew on, Arik sat in silence, realizing that this was only the beginning of the struggle between love and power. His journey toward understanding Amara, and ultimately understanding himself, was just beginning. Arik's emotional breakthrough, though small, signaled a major shift in his perspective. However, his internal conflict remained unresolved. His recognition of Amara's worth as a partner, rather than just his mate, was a significant step forward, but his fear of losing control and his ingrained beliefs about power still held him back from fully embracing the change. Chapter 16. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her gown. The room was quiet. The only sound was the soft crackling of the fireplace. She had spent hours thinking about the conversation with Arik earlier, the rawness of it still lingering in the back of her mind. His words had unsettled her. He had acknowledged her strength, but now she couldn't shake the vulnerability she felt in response. I never expected him to say that, she thought. He sees me. But can I let myself fall for him? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the moonlit palace grounds. The stars twinkled above, a stark contrast to the heaviness in her chest. She knew what she had to face. She couldn't keep holding back. The bond, the fear of losing herself, the desire to stay strong, it was all tangled together. I love him, she admitted silently to herself. But can I love him without disappearing? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She turned to face it, her heart racing. When she opened it, Arik stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He didn't step forward, but his presence was undeniable, filling the space between them. Amara! Arik's voice was softer than usual, a crack in his usual command. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I need you to understand. I never meant to push you away. It's just, I've always had to control everything. It's the only way I know how to survive. Amara felt a pang in her chest. She had never heard him speak so openly about his fears, his insecurities. Her gaze softened as she met his eyes, seeing a vulnerability there that had always been hidden beneath his exterior. I understand, Arik, she said quietly. But I need to know, if I stay with you, will I still have myself? Will I be able to be me, and not just a part of your world? Arik's jaw clenched, and for a moment, the walls around him seemed to rise again. I don't know how to let go of control, he admitted, his voice low. It's who I am. It's how I've survived. But I can't help but feel that if I let go too much, I might lose everything. Amara stepped closer, feeling the tension between them crackling in the air. I don't want to be a part of a kingdom built on fear, Arik. I want us to be equals. But if you can't let go of your need to control, I don't know how we can move forward. For a moment, Arik didn't respond. His gaze was distant, like he was wrestling with something inside himself. But then, something shifted in his eyes, a glimmer of understanding, of recognition. Amara reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. You don't have to have all the answers, Arik. You don't have to be perfect. But I need to know that I won't lose myself in this. Arik looked down at her hand, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. His hand rested lightly on hers, as if testing the weight of the connection between them. I don't know what I'm doing, Amara, he confessed, his voice cracking slightly. I've never had to share power before, not like this. I don't know how to let someone in without fearing that I'll lose everything I've worked for. Amara felt a deep pang in her heart. She could see the raw vulnerability in him, the same fear that had kept her at arm's length for so long. It was both heartbreaking and relieving to know that they were struggling with the same emotions. Maybe we don't need to have it all figured out, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe we just need to take it one step at a time. Together. Arik looked at her, his eyes softer now, a mix of admiration and uncertainty. Together, he repeated, the word like a promise hanging in the air. The tension between them began to dissipate, replaced by something deeper, an understanding, a connection neither had fully realized until now. Amara felt her heart open, a warmth spreading through her chest as she saw the true depth of Arik's struggle. She no longer saw him just as the king who ruled with iron fists. She saw the man who was fighting his own battles, just as she was. Arik, too, felt the shift. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to dominate, to control every situation. Instead, he felt a vulnerability in the face of Amara's honesty and a deep respect for her strength. She wasn't just his mate. She was his equal, his partner. As they stood there, a sense of mutual respect and understanding bloomed between them. The walls they had both built around their hearts started to crumble, replaced by something more fragile and real, trust. For the first time, Amara felt like Arik truly saw her as a person, not just a part of his kingdom, and she began to see him as more than just the ruthless ruler he had once seemed to be. But there was still uncertainty, still the lingering question of whether they could truly navigate this complex relationship, balancing love and power. Still, for the first time, Amara allowed herself to believe that there was hope for them, that they could find a way forward. And Arik, too, took a small step toward embracing that possibility. Amara sat by the window, looking out at the vast expanse of the palace grounds as the evening sky began to darken. The conversation with Arik still echoed in her mind, a mixture of relief and doubt. She had opened up to him in a way she never had before, and she felt a sense of vulnerability that both terrified and liberated her. But the question remained, had she truly found a way to balance her love for him with her need for independence? He's changed, she thought, her fingers tracing the edge of the window. He's seen me, really seen me. But what if it's not enough? What if he still won't let me be myself? The thought weighed heavily on her. She had fought so hard for her autonomy, and now, despite the emotional breakthrough, she wasn't sure if she could afford to let herself be consumed by him. Arik's nature, his dominance, still loomed over their relationship, like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I don't want to lose myself. But can I really stay in this relationship if I'm always fighting to keep a part of me safe? Later that evening, Amara found herself in the quiet, familiar company of her closest confidant. Tessa sat beside her, her eyes full of concern as she listened to Amara recount the conversation with Arik. I've never seen him like this, Tessa, Amara said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. He's trying to change, trying to see me as more than just his mate. But I don't know if I can trust that it's real. I don't know if I can trust him not to slip back into old habits. Tessa sighed, her expression softening with empathy. You've been through so much with him, Amara. You know better than anyone the cost of trying to be something you're not. But love doesn't come easy. It's complicated. It's messy. It's not just about what Arik is willing to change. You have to change too. You have to find a way to balance your love for him with your love for yourself. And that's not always easy. Amara looked down, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her sleeve. I'm scared, Tessa. What if I let him in, really let him in, and I lose myself in the process? What if the part of me that is strong, that is independent, is the part that he can't accept? What if he changes, but I can't? Tessa's voice was soft but firm. You fought so hard for your freedom, Amara. Don't let it slip away, just because of some fear. You're strong, and if Arik is really seeing you for who you are, he'll respect that strength. But you can't lose sight of it. You can't let yourself disappear in his shadow. Amara nodded, though the uncertainty still clung to her heart. She had never been one to rely on anyone, especially not a man. But the thought of losing Arik, of giving up on something that had the potential to be something great, left her torn. Later that night, Amara stood in front of her mirror, looking at herself with a new resolve. She had reflected deeply, and though the uncertainty still lingered, something inside her had shifted. I have to take control of my own life. I have to be strong enough to love him, but not lose myself. The fear of becoming too attached, of being subsumed by Arik's world, still nagged at her. But Amara had always been a fighter. She had fought for her independence, for her identity, and she wasn't about to let Arik, or anyone, take that from her. I can love him, she thought, her hand resting on her heart. But I won't lose myself in the process. I won't give up my autonomy. Amara knew she had to set boundaries, for her own sanity, for her own strength. But she also knew she couldn't keep running from the possibility of love, from the chance to build something real with Arik. I'll make it work, she decided, her voice steady. I'll find a way to be with him, but still be me. I have to. As Amara stood in the quiet solitude of her room, she felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time, she felt like she was taking control of her own fate, not just in the context of her relationship with Arik, but in her life as a whole. She had always fought for her independence, and now she was learning how to fight for love without losing herself in the process. Her heart was still heavy, but there was a clarity there now. She was ready to move forward, to face the complexities of her relationship with Arik. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let fear dictate her future. Amara's decision to move forward was a pivotal moment, not just in her relationship with Arik, but in her personal growth. She had taken the first step toward creating a partnership based on mutual respect, not control. But the road ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges they would face were far from over. Amara wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but for the first time, she felt ready to take it, with Arik and with herself. Chapter 17. Amara entered the council room with a quiet determination, her eyes scanning the faces of the advisors seated around the long oval table. Arik had invited her to join this meeting, something she had longed for but also feared. This was her moment to prove herself, to show that her thoughts on the kingdom's future were as important as anyone else's. As she took her seat beside Arik, the murmurs around the room quieted. She could feel the weight of their gazes, measuring her, questioning her place in the meeting. Despite her growing confidence in her own abilities, she could not shake the nerves that tightened her chest. Arik, who had been silent until now, glanced at her with an encouraging nod. His presence was a steady reminder that she had come a long way, but there was still so much to prove. The first advisor spoke, his tone skeptical. "Your Majesty, we need more solid agreements with neighboring pacts, not just alliances based on empty promises. Perhaps you should focus on strengthening military positions instead of diplomatic gestures." Amara took a deep breath. "They don't believe in my ideas. But that's fine. I can handle this." With a calm but firm voice, she began. "We can strengthen our military, but true power comes from unity. Strengthening alliances through trade and mutual benefit will give us a foundation that can withstand any external threat." A few advisors exchanged glances, their skepticism clear. Arik's gaze remained neutral, but Amara noticed him silently watching her, his eyes narrowing in concentration. Despite the determination in her voice, Amara could feel the weight of their disbelief. The advisors were more accustomed to Arik's authority, and her fresh approach to leadership was met with resistance. She could sense their hesitation, their reluctance to accept her as a decision-maker. Amara's mind raced as the conversation continued. The more the advisors pushed back, the more she realized that they expected her to back down. They wanted to see if she would retreat into silence, just as they had always seen women in the palace do. But Amara was no longer willing to shrink back. This was her kingdom too, and she had a voice that deserved to be heard. "I understand your concerns," Amara said, her voice steady. "But we cannot keep relying on brute force alone. True strength comes from the ability to adapt, to build relationships that serve us long after the battles are over." One of the more senior advisors scoffed, his tone mocking. "What do you know about strategy, princess? Your father may have been king, but you are new to this game." The insult stung, but Amara did not let it show. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Arik's. She knew he was watching her closely, and she could feel the pressure of his expectations. But it was no longer just about proving herself to him. It was about showing everyone in the room that she belonged here. "I may be new to this," she began, her tone calm but unwavering, "but I am not without knowledge. I've spent years observing, learning, understanding the dynamics of this kingdom and its allies. It's time we stop treating this as a game and start thinking like a united front." There was a moment of silence, the room still in disbelief at her unyielding confidence. As the room fell into quiet, Arik finally spoke, his voice carrying a weight of authority that silenced any further objections. "Amara's perspective is valuable," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Her insights come from a place of strategic foresight, and I have no doubt that they will benefit us. We will be taking her suggestions into serious consideration from this point forward." Amara's heart skipped a beat as Arik's words echoed through the room. The advisors looked at each other, clearly surprised by his support. For the first time, she felt like she had truly earned his trust, his belief in her ideas. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. Arik's moment of trust in her was a breakthrough, but it was still fragile. She could see the hesitation in his eyes, the old instincts of control fighting to rise up. He wasn't fully ready to give up the reins, not yet. Amara started the scene filled with self-doubt, unsure of her place at the table and wondering if she would ever be taken seriously. But by the end of the meeting, she felt empowered. She had stood her ground, had asserted herself in the face of resistance, and had earned the respect of the council, at least for now. Arik, too, had started the scene with uncertainty. He had supported Amara, but with a silent distance, unsure if he could fully embrace her role as a leader. However, by the end of the meeting, he found himself admiring her strength and clarity. He had begun to see her not just as his mate, but as his equal. Amara's confidence grew as she realized that she could be more than just a bystander in her own life. Her voice had been heard, and for the first time, she felt like a true partner in Arik's reign. As for Arik, his view of her had shifted, and he was starting to trust her judgment in a way he hadn't before. Though their partnership was still in its early stages, this was a moment of progress. Arik's respect for Amara had deepened, and Amara, too, was beginning to trust herself as a leader, knowing that she could stand beside him, not as a subordinate, but as his equal. Arik sat in a large, leather armchair by the fire, his eyes gazing into the flames. The evening had settled into a quiet lull, the palace around them still and peaceful. Amara sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her thoughts swirling. She hadn't expected this. When they had first begun their relationship, she had assumed it would always be filled with tension and unspoken expectations. But now, as she sat there, she could see the potential for something more. They had started to build something together, a partnership, though she still wasn't sure how fully she could trust Arik with all of herself. "I've been thinking about the future," Arik said, breaking the silence, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. "About how we can work together to ensure the kingdom flourishes. I want you to be a part of that, Amara. Not just as my mate, but as my partner. Your ideas, they matter." Amara watched him, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of manipulation, but there was only sincerity. Still, doubts lingered in her mind. Does he truly mean it? "I don't want to be the person who's only by your side for appearances, Arik," she said, her voice tentative. "I need to be more than that. I need to feel that what I contribute matters, not just as the queen, but as someone with real agency in this kingdom." Arik's gaze softened, though there was still the faint edge of his old guardedness. "I see you, Amara. Not just as the woman I'm bound to, but as someone who has as much to offer as I do. You are my equal, and together we will lead." Amara swallowed, feeling her heart quicken in her chest. Does he really see me as his equal? Or is this just another way to keep me under control? She bit her lip, unsure of how to express the skepticism that still weighed on her. Every time she allowed herself to trust him, it seemed like something would happen that reminded her of the ruthlessness he was capable of. He had never been anything but commanding, always focused on power and control. "I want to believe that," she said quietly, her voice wavering slightly. "But there's always this part of me that's afraid that your need for control will come back. That I'll lose myself in this relationship, in the role you want me to play. I can't be swallowed up by this kingdom. I can't be just a symbol." Arik's expression hardened slightly, a shadow passing over his face as he listened. He opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm not saying you don't see me, but I need to know you'll respect my autonomy, Arik. I need to know that I won't lose who I am while being with you." Arik leaned forward in his chair, his voice softening. "Amara, I never wanted to take away your identity. That was never my intention. I've spent my life fighting for control because I feared losing everything, my kingdom, my power, my place. But with you, it's different. You don't have to fit into the mold I created. I see you for who you are. I want you by my side not as an ornament, but as my equal, as my queen." Amara searched his face, looking for any hint of insincerity, but she found none. His words felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. It was what she had longed to hear, but part of her still feared it was just what he thought she wanted to hear. "Can I truly trust him?" she wondered. "I'm not asking you to change who you are, Amara," Arik continued, his voice steady and sincere. I want us to grow together, side by side. If we're going to make this work, we have to do it as partners, not as one person in control and the other beneath them. Amara's heart beat faster at his words, but a lingering doubt crept in. What if this is just the beginning? What if I let him in, and I end up just as trapped as I feared? She took a slow breath, unsure of how to frame her thoughts. Arik, I need to know that I won't lose myself in this relationship. I need to know that you won't control every part of my life, that you'll let me grow alongside you, not be swallowed by you. Arik's gaze hardened for a moment, but he took a deep breath, nodding slowly. I understand, he said, his voice quieter now. I've always thought control was the only way to keep everything intact, to prevent chaos. But I realize now that I have to trust you, and I have to trust myself to let go. Amara looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he could change, but the fear still lingered. She feared that in the pursuit of love, she would lose herself in him. I love you, Arik, she whispered, but love isn't enough if I lose myself in it. I need to know that I can still be me, that I can still make my own decisions, and that you'll respect that. Arik's expression softened as he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I promise you, Amara, I will respect you. I'll never ask you to be something you're not. I know I have my flaws, and my fear of losing control has always driven me, but I'm willing to change for us. Amara began the scene feeling conflicted, still uncertain whether Arik's promises were genuine or if he would eventually slip back into old habits. But by the end of their conversation, she felt a sense of emotional release. The words they shared, the vulnerability they both offered, began to break down the walls between them. She wasn't sure if she could completely trust him yet, but she could see that he was trying. And that meant something. Arik, too, started the scene with a defensive attitude, unsure if he could truly let go of his need for control. But by the end of the conversation, he had acknowledged his fears and had taken a step toward vulnerability. He realized that he had to let Amara be her own person if their relationship was going to work, and that realization shifted something deep inside him. Amara and Arik's relationship had moved forward, but it was clear that the journey was far from over. They had reached a pivotal moment in their understanding of each other, but true balance would take time and effort. Both knew that they were at the beginning of something new, a new dynamic built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. But there was still much to navigate. Chapter 18. The tension in the air was palpable as Amara and Arik sat in the war room, the long table between them covered with maps, letters, and reports. A rival pack, led by a powerful and cunning alpha, had been steadily gaining influence, threatening the fragile peace that Amara and Arik had worked so hard to establish. Arik's jaw tightened as he read the latest report, his hand slamming onto the table. This will not stand. We cannot allow them to grow any more powerful. Amara, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward, her gaze meeting his. We can't act out of anger, Arik. If we're rash, we risk turning this into a war. But Arik was already standing, his fists clenched. They want to take what's ours. They want to challenge us. I can't sit back and wait. Amara held up her hand. No. We need to think this through. Arik paused, his eyes narrowing. You have an idea? Amara took a breath, steadying herself. She had to make him see reason, but the old instincts were still there, the same instincts that made Arik want to strike first and think later. Yes. I think we should propose a meeting, a gesture of goodwill. We can invite them to discuss the terms of an alliance, but under our conditions. Arik shot her a skeptical look. You want to offer them an alliance? What will that accomplish except make us look weak? Amara met his gaze unwaveringly. It's a show of strength, Arik. It shows that we can maintain control without resorting to violence. If we act too aggressively, we risk losing the support of our allies. If we show that we're willing to negotiate, we keep them on their toes. Arik's eyes darkened as he considered her words. I don't like it, but if you believe it's the best course of action. I do, she said, her voice steady. Trust me. There was a brief silence before Arik nodded, albeit reluctantly. He leaned over the table, his fingers pressing down on the map of the kingdom. "I'll back you up, Amara. But you need to make sure this doesn't make us look weak. We need to be firm. Make sure they understand that this is a negotiation, not a concession." Amara nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She wasn't backing down. She could do this, she thought, as she made final adjustments to the plan. "I'll make sure they understand. And I'll make sure they see how strong we are." Together, they outlined their strategy, extend the invitation for peace talks, but make it clear that they were not to be undermined. The rival Alpha had underestimated them before. This time, they would play their cards wisely. The days that followed were tense, and the air felt heavy as Arik and Amara awaited the rival Alpha's response. But they had prepared thoroughly. The rival pack had no choice but to accept the invitation, though their true intentions remained unclear. As the day of the meeting arrived, Amara and Arik stood side by side, their guards and advisors filling the room as the rival's emissary entered. The negotiations were long, fraught with tension and veiled threats, but Amara kept her composure, listening to every word, analyzing each move. Finally, it was Arik's turn to speak. His presence was commanding, but this time, Amara stood with him. The power dynamic had shifted. They were partners, facing the challenge together. Arik leaned forward. "This alliance will not be based on weakness. You will not overstep us. If you wish to align with us, you will do so on our terms." The rival Alpha hesitated, then nodded, realizing that Arik and Amara had played their hand well. The tension between them finally began to ease, and the agreement was reached. After the negotiations, Amara and Arik retreated to the palace, where a brief moment of relief was followed by the realization that their victory had not been without its costs. Though they had avoided conflict, tensions within their own ranks simmered. Some advisors were displeased with the idea of diplomacy, believing that Arik's strength should have been enough to crush the rival Alpha's challenge. "The council won't be happy," Arik said as they walked through the halls, his tone grave. "We might have won the battle, but the war for control over our own kingdom is far from over." Amara, though exhausted, stood tall beside him. "We've done what's right. We've shown them that we don't need to resort to violence to maintain our power. We can lead with wisdom, not just strength." Arik glanced at her, his expression softening. "You were right. You've proven that there's more to leadership than brute force." Amara began the scene feeling uncertain, still testing her influence in this partnership. She feared Arik might override her, as he had before, but by the end of the meeting, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had earned his trust, and for the first time, she felt truly respected as a leader in her own right. She had made a real difference. Arik, too, had started the scene with hesitation, unsure of whether he could trust Amara's judgment fully. But as they faced the challenge together and succeeded, his admiration for her grew. He realized that their bond, both personal and professional, was stronger than he had ever imagined. The plan had worked. The rival's challenge had been averted, and the fragile peace they had fought for remained intact. Arik and Amara had proven that they could face challenges together, working as a team, their strengths complementing each other. The trust between them had deepened, though they knew there would be more tests ahead. Their relationship had transformed from one of uncertainty to one of mutual respect and understanding. They were no longer just ruler and mate. They were partners, facing the future side by side. Amara sat by the window, looking out over the distant horizon where the palace grounds met the dark sky. The evening air was cool, a breeze ruffling her hair as she thought about everything that had happened in the past few weeks. There had been change, real change. Arik, the man who had once ruled with an iron fist, was now starting to see her not just as his mate, but as his equal. She had to admit, even to herself, that she had come a long way in accepting him as well. But the weight of his power still lingered, an invisible force that sometimes made her feel small, despite everything they had worked through together. The door to her chambers creaked open, and Arik stepped inside, his presence commanding as always. But today, there was something different in his eyes, something softer, more vulnerable. "I've been thinking about us," Arik said, his voice quieter than usual. He walked over to where Amara sat, pausing when he saw the reflection of her in the glass. About what we've become, and how much we've changed since we first started this journey. Amara didn't look at him immediately, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. Her heart beat faster at the sound of his words. He was always so certain, so dominant. But now, he was speaking as though he was still figuring things out, just like her. "I've noticed it too," she said, her voice soft. "We've come a long way from where we started. There's a balance between us now, but there's still so much to navigate." Arik stepped closer, his shadow falling across her as he sat down beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he sighed, his shoulders heavy as if carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "I've always thought strength was in control. I thought that if I could control everything, I could protect those I care about. But you've shown me that strength isn't about control. It's about being able to trust, to collaborate." Amara felt a tightness in her chest. She had heard him say things like this before, but it never felt quite as real as it did now. The shift in him was tangible. She could feel it, almost physically. But the question still burned in her mind. Was it genuine? Or was this just another way for him to maintain control, but in a different form? She turned her gaze to him, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I want to believe you, Arik. I want to believe that this change is real. But I also know that power doesn't just disappear overnight. You've ruled with dominance for so long, I'm not sure I can trust that it won't come back." Arik's expression shifted, as if the weight of her words landed somewhere deep inside him. "I understand why you feel that way. I've always been afraid to show vulnerability, afraid that if I did, I'd lose everything. But the truth is, I don't want to lose you. I can't keep doing this alone. I need you, Amara. And I'm starting to see that what we have together is what will make us stronger, not what I can hold on to." Amara closed her eyes for a moment, processing his words. The vulnerability in his voice, the admission that he needed her, it was something she never expected. She had always been so used to him controlling everything around him, seeing her as a piece of his kingdom to be managed, not as someone who could truly share the load. But this was different. For the first time, she saw him, really saw him, as someone who was willing to change, to evolve. She turned her head, meeting his gaze once more. "I'm scared, Arik. Scared that if I let myself fall fully into this, I'll lose everything I've worked for. But I also know that we can't keep going like this, with one of us always holding back, always fearing that the other will take too much." He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. The touch was tender, not demanding, not forceful, just a simple, reassuring gesture that made her heart skip a beat. "Then we'll take this step by step. Together. We'll keep changing, keep learning from each other. I'm not perfect, Amara, but I'm trying. And I need you to be with me, to help me see what I can't." Her heart softened at his words. The fear was still there, deep in her chest, but it was no longer as paralyzing. For the first time, she saw the possibility of a partnership of two people, each with their strengths and flaws, coming together to build something stronger than what either of them could have done alone. "I'm willing to try, Arik," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But we need to be honest with each other. We need to trust that we both have something valuable to offer, even if it's hard sometimes." Arik nodded, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. "We will. No more walls between us." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of mutual understanding, of the recognition that they had both grown in ways they hadn't expected. They had started as two people, wary and unsure, trying to figure out where they stood. But now they were partners, real partners, willing to face whatever came next together. As the night wore on, Amara and Arik sat in the quiet of the room, the weight of their shared understanding hanging in the air. Both had spoken truths that had once been too difficult to admit, and the bond between them had deepened as a result. Amara felt more secure in her role as Arik's partner, knowing that their relationship was no longer just about him being the ruler and her being his mate. It was about building something together, sharing the load, and learning to respect each other's contributions. Arik, too, had shifted. He no longer saw Amara simply as his mate to be controlled, but as an equal, his partner, his queen, someone he could trust and rely on. The walls between them had started to crumble, and the future seemed far less daunting now. Together, they could face anything. But even with this newfound connection, they both knew the journey ahead would still require effort. The real work had just begun, but for the first time, they felt ready to take it on together. Chapter 19. Amara stood at the edge of the grand hall, her fingers lightly brushing against the cool stone of the palace. She had been here many times before, but today, the weight of the moment was unlike anything she had ever felt. The coronation was only moments away, and with it, the transformation of her life from a rebellious princess to the queen she was about to become. The palace was filled with the sound of hushed voices, the buzz of excitement and anticipation echoing through the vast chamber. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she looked over at Arik, who stood beside her, as poised and confident as ever. He looked at her with pride in his eyes, but there was a flicker of something deeper, an understanding, a trust, something they had built over time. Something they had both fought for. Arik leaned in, his voice soft. "You're ready, Amara. This is your moment." Amara nodded, though the nerves still twisted in her stomach. She had come so far, but the fear of being judged, the fear of failure, lingered in the back of her mind. Can I truly do this? The weight of the crown, of the people watching her, was immense. She had never wanted to be a symbol, never wanted to be a leader defined by the expectations of others. But now, she knew that this was the path she had to take. This was the future she and Arik would build together. Her gaze shifted to the grand doors of the hall, which slowly swung open, revealing the gathered nobles, advisors, and citizens of the kingdom. The room fell silent as they turned to face her, their eyes filled with curiosity, skepticism, and she hoped hope. The ceremony proceeded in sweeping moments of grandeur, but it was when Arik reached for the crown that the magnitude of the moment truly hit Amara. He placed it gently in her hands, his fingers brushing against hers, and for a brief second, she felt the weight of what was about to happen. The crown was not just a symbol of her new title, but of the trust he had placed in her, of the partnership they had forged. The crown felt heavy on her head, but for the first time, it felt like it belonged there. As Arik took a step back, Amara stood tall, the entire room watching her with bated breath. She had come this far, now was the moment to make it real. The murmurs died down as she raised her hand to address the kingdom. She could feel her heart beating in her throat, the doubts that had once plagued her mind trying to claw their way back. But she couldn't let them. She had fought for this moment, and now she had to take it. I stand before you not just as the queen you've all dreamed of, but as a partner to Arik, a leader who will not stand in the shadow of anyone. Together, we will lead this kingdom into a new age of prosperity and strength. Together, we will face every challenge and overcome it, united as one. There was a moment of silence as the weight of her words settled in the room. For a fleeting second, Amara felt a pang of uncertainty. Was it enough? Was she enough? Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, growing louder until the entire room was filled with the sound of their approval. It was louder than anything she had ever imagined, and it wasn't just for her coronation, it was for the woman she had become, the leader she was becoming. Amara felt the tension leave her body, replaced with a sense of pride and empowerment. The fears that had once held her back were slipping away, leaving only the undeniable truth. She was ready for this. Arik stepped forward, his hand resting on her shoulder as he stood by her side. The moment felt timeless, like they had crossed some threshold that would never be undone. They had come this far, and now they were ready for whatever came next. "I couldn't have done this without you," Arik said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You've shown me what it means to truly lead, to trust. And now we will do this together, as equals." Amara met his gaze, her heart full. For so long, she had feared being controlled, feared losing herself. But here, in this moment, she knew that their love was not a cage. It was a partnership, a bond forged in mutual respect in struggle and understanding. She didn't have to be afraid anymore. Together, they turned to face the kingdom, their united front a symbol of their strength. As Amara and Arik stood together at the heart of the palace, the weight of their shared leadership was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. Amara had fully stepped into her role as queen, and Arik had truly accepted her as his partner, not just in name, but in every sense of the word. The road ahead would not be without its challenges, but together they were ready to face them. This was their kingdom, their future, and their love. And as they stepped forward into the unknown, there was no doubt in Amara's mind that they would rise to meet it together. Amara sat quietly beside Arik, her fingers tracing the edges of the ornate table in their private chambers. The sounds of the kingdom outside faded away, replaced by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The coronation had been a success, but now, as the quiet settled in, the weight of their new responsibilities was beginning to settle over them both. Arik, seated across from her, let out a slow breath, his gaze distant. She could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands clenched and unclenched by his sides. For all the public success, there was something darker behind his eyes, something he hadn't voiced yet. "You're still thinking about the past," Amara said softly, her voice breaking through the silence. Arik glanced at her, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I failed you before, Amara. I was too controlling, too harsh. And now, after everything, I'm afraid I haven't really changed. I've always led with strength, and that part of me still feels like it might take over. I'm scared it will always be a part of me." Amara looked at him, her heart aching. She had seen his struggle, his desire to dominate, to keep everything under his control. It wasn't easy to let go of that. But she had seen something else in him too, the desire to grow, to let her in, to trust her as his partner. "You've changed more than you realize," she said, her voice steady. "When we first started, I didn't see this. I didn't think we could become equals, but we have. You've let go of so much, Arik, and I see you fighting those old instincts, not because you have to, but because you want to." Arik's expression softened slightly, though the doubt was still there. "I want to believe that," he murmured, "but sometimes I still feel like I'm going to slip back, that I'll lose you or everything I've worked for." Amara reached across the table, her hand gently covering his. "You're not going to lose me, Arik. You haven't, but I won't lie to you. There will always be pressure, and yes, there will always be doubts. But we've already come this far together, and I believe that we can keep going, not as two people with separate roles, but as partners, equal partners." She paused, watching the way his fingers tightened around hers, as though her words had finally reached him. But she knew there were still battles ahead. The pressure to be perfect, to meet everyone's expectations, would never go away. They both knew that. "I've seen you grow, Arik. And I've changed too," Amara continued, her voice low but firm. "This kingdom needs both of us, not just one. And as long as we continue to work together, we can face whatever comes next. But it has to be as equals, not as master and subject. We owe it to ourselves and to the people we lead." Arik nodded slowly, his gaze softening as he absorbed her words. The guilt that had clung to him began to loosen, though it was still there in the quiet moments. He had to let it go. He had to believe that they were truly a team now. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not perfect, and neither are you. But together we're stronger. I will do everything I can to make sure that you don't lose yourself in this. I'll protect you, Amara, not just as my mate, but as my queen, as my equal." Amara smiled, feeling the bond between them deepen in that moment. There was still so much to face, so much to learn. But for the first time, she truly believed that they could do it. She had been afraid of losing herself, but now she saw a future where they could grow together, side by side. "We've both got a lot to learn," she said with a laugh. "But I think we'll figure it out, one step at a time." Arik's lips twitched into a small smile, his hand still holding hers. One step at a time. The silence that followed was comfortable now, a mutual understanding settling over them. Outside, The kingdom was still, but inside the palace, in this moment, Amara and Arik were connected, not just as rulers, but as partners. They had faced their darkest fears, and now, for the first time, they were moving forward together with open hearts. As they sat together, hands entwined, both Amara and Arik realized that their bond was no longer one of control and submission. It was built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared commitment to the future. Though there would still be challenges ahead, they knew that they were ready to face them, not alone, but together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt secure in their roles, ready to lead not just as king and queen, but as equals. Chapter 20. The sun had barely risen when the urgent message arrived. Amara and Arik were still in the midst of their morning preparations when one of their messengers arrived, breathless and panicked. The rival kingdom, one that had always been a thorn in their side, had issued an ultimatum. They claimed that the sovereignty of Arik's kingdom was in question, threatening war if Arik didn't comply with their demands. Amara felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. This was more than just a political dispute, it was a test of her leadership, her strength, and her partnership with Arik. She glanced over at him, and for a moment, both of them were silent, the enormity of what was unfolding between them hanging in the air. "This is a direct challenge to our rule," Arik muttered, his voice low but filled with steel. He walked over to the map on the table, his hand gripping the edge as his eyes scanned the kingdoms to the north. They've always wanted power. Now they think they can take it. Amara crossed the room to stand beside him, her expression hardening. "We can't let them do this, but we don't need to start a war to prove we're strong." Arik glanced at her, his eyes filled with a flicker of doubt. "You think diplomacy will work? You've seen how they operate. The king of that kingdom doesn't know how to make peace." Amara met his gaze, her heart steady despite the rising tension. "I believe in what we've built. I believe in the alliances we formed. We don't need to fight, we need to show them that we are united. And we need to use every tool at our disposal, not just force." Arik's expression softened for a moment, and he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I know you're right, but there's always been a part of me that relies on strength. What if they think we're weak if we don't fight back?" "You don't have to fight to be strong, Arik," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "What if they think we're strong enough to win without a single drop of blood being shed?" Arik's gaze lingered on her for a long moment, and for the first time, Amara saw the struggle in his eyes. The man who had once ruled with absolute authority, who had known only war and conquest, was learning to see the value in something else, something that wasn't about control or dominance. "We'll do this together," Arik said at last, his voice resolute. "We'll send a message, but it won't be through battle. We'll show them that we lead with strength and wisdom." Amara nodded, feeling the relief of knowing they were on the same page. "Let's send a messenger. We'll propose a meeting, but we'll make it clear that it's our terms. We'll set the stage for peace, under our conditions." The hours passed quickly as they worked together to craft their response. They debated the specifics of their message, knowing that every word would carry weight. Amara's mind raced as she considered every angle, every possible outcome. Arik listened, offering his thoughts, his doubts, but ultimately trusting her judgment. They were a team, and this time, Arik wasn't trying to overshadow her. He was listening. He was learning. When the messenger arrived, Amara and Arik stood side by side, hands resting on the table in front of them. The message was clear. They were not going to bend to threats. They would negotiate, but only if the rival kingdom agreed to meet on their terms. The rival kingdom's response came swiftly. They accepted the proposal, but insisted on a meeting in neutral territory. Amara and Arik made their way to the location, the atmosphere tense as they traveled. But there was no turning back now. Amara's plan was set in motion, and they would see it through together. The meeting itself was fraught with tension, the rival king standing across from Amara and Arik with his arms crossed, his eyes sharp and calculating. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure, offering her words carefully. "We stand here today, not as enemies, But as leaders, Amara said, her voice carrying the weight of the moment, we are not here to bow to threats. We are here to discuss the future of our kingdoms, not through violence, but through mutual respect. The rival king sneered, but Amara did not waver. She had the support of their allies behind her, and she knew that this was their chance to prove themselves. Arik stood beside her, his presence commanding, but he was silent, letting Amara speak her mind. We will not be intimidated. You will hear our terms, and we will discuss a path forward. But understand this, we lead together, and we will not be divided. The rival king remained silent for a long moment, then finally spoke, his tone less hostile than before. You're bold, Amara. I will give you that. Perhaps there is something to your approach after all. Amara began the scene feeling the immense pressure of the situation, uncertain if her approach would work. But by the end, after the meeting was concluded and a ceasefire was agreed upon, she felt a surge of confidence. She had done it. She had brokered peace, and she had done it without a single weapon raised. Arik, too, had undergone a transformation. He had started the scene with doubt, questioning whether diplomacy would really work. But by the end, he was not only proud of Amara's strength, but also humbled by it. He had seen the value in her wisdom, and for the first time, he felt like he could trust her completely. Their united front had succeeded. The rival kingdom had backed down, not because they feared Arik's strength, but because they had seen the strength of Amara and Arik's partnership. Together, they had proven that they were more than capable of leading, not just through force, but through wisdom and collaboration. The kingdom's future had never looked more secure, and Amara and Arik stood side by side, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The light of the setting sun filtered through the palace windows, casting long shadows across the room where Amara and Arik stood together. The weight of the day's events, the meetings, the reports, the kingdom's needs, hung heavy in the air. But despite the pressure, there was a quiet calm between them, an unspoken understanding that had solidified over time. They were no longer two separate entities, ruling from their own corners of the world. They were one, united, not just in title, but in heart. Amara looked at Arik, her eyes studying the man who had once ruled with an iron grip, whose confidence had been his armor. But now, she saw something else in him. Vulnerability, a willingness to trust. He had changed, and so had she. Together, they had come to understand that leadership was not about dominance, but about balance, about lifting each other up, sharing the burden, and finding strength in unity. Arik turned to her, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. Amara, he began, his voice quieter than usual, I've never known how to be vulnerable. But with you I'm learning. I've always seen you as my queen, but now, I see you as my equal. In every way. Amara's breath caught in her chest. The words were simple, but they held so much weight. She had always known the power of their bond, but to hear Arik admit that they were equals, no longer just ruler and subject, was something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for. She had fought for this, for a place beside him, not behind him. And now, standing together, she felt the quiet pride of knowing that she had earned her place. You've always been more than just a ruler, Arik, she replied softly. You've been my partner from the beginning, even when I didn't understand what that meant. I was afraid of losing myself in this role, but I've learned that it's not about surrendering who we are, it's about creating something stronger together. Arik stepped closer, his hand brushing hers in a tender gesture, one that spoke of trust and connection. I know it hasn't been easy for you, and it hasn't been easy for me either. But what we've built, what we are building, it's more than just a kingdom. It's our future, and I want you by my side, not just as my queen, but as my equal. Amara nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of emotion and relief. She had feared that the power dynamics between them would always leave her feeling small, overshadowed by his strength and authority. But now, standing here, she understood that their strength was in their unity, in their shared purpose. I will always stand by your side, she said, her voice steady. No matter the challenges, no matter the weight of the world on our shoulders, I will be here. As your queen, as your partner. Always. Arik took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining, a silent promise passing between them. And I will always stand with you, Amara. As your king, yes, but also as your partner. Your equal. Together, we are unstoppable. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the world outside fading into the background. It was just the two of them, in this quiet moment of understanding. The challenges would never stop coming, but they had already weathered so much together. And now, more than ever, Amara was sure that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. They were ready to lead, not just as rulers, but as equals, united in their love and their commitment to the kingdom. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara and Arik stood side by side, their bond stronger than ever. Their love had been tested, their trust had been forged in the fires of leadership, and now they stood together as a powerful team, united not just by fate, but by choice. Amara had embraced her role as queen, not as a passive title, but as an active partner in shaping the future. And Arik, for the first time, saw her not just as his mate, but as his equal. Together, they had transformed, individually and as a couple, and now there was nothing they couldn't face, nothing they couldn't overcome. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were ready to face it together. I just want to say a very big thank you for the love and support, and I wouldn't be here doing what I love if it weren't for you. Daily we keep on improving and getting better to tell you the best stories and to help you relax and enter into a beautiful werewolf romance world. Please let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. The next video is already in production, and trust me, it is amazing. We've decided to give us girls a chance to rule, and let's see what we can do. A female alpha, a female heroine, but let's also see if she can navigate love in her leadership role.